And I now ask that you recognize the gentleman from Taney for a motion on House Committee Substitute for House Joint Resolution 73.
Gentleman from Taney, for what purpose do you rise?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that House Joint Resolution 73 be perfected and printed.
The gentleman from Taney has moved that House Joint Resolution 73 be ordered, perfected, and printed. Gentleman from Taney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that the House Committee Substitute for House Joint Resolution 73 be adopted.
The gentleman from Taney has moved for the adoption of House Committee Substitute for House Joint Resolution 73. The gentleman from Taney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that the title of HCS for HJR 73 be agreed to.
The gentleman from Taney has moved that the title for House Committee Substitute for House Joint Resolution 73 be agreed to. Discussion on the title. Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. You've agreed to the title. Gentleman from Taney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I present to you House Joint Resolution 73. This legislation is multifaceted. The preeminent facet is that it protects women. What Amendment 3 took away from them, this legislation seeks to restore. What is voted on by this body will help foster a culture of life in Missouri, one that all of our citizens can support. Mr. Speaker, it's the state's duty to protect public health and welfare, including protecting the integrity and ethics of the medical profession. This legislation helps return providers to a position of emphasizing patient care, including sufficient exams and licensure. This legislation helps physicians to maintain their oath. HJR 73 will eventually go to a vote of the people, and because the voters expressed that they wanted exceptions, HJR 73 provides those. It also declares that the General Assembly may enact laws that ensure the health and welfare of pregnant mothers. This legislation will ensure that facilities where abortions are performed are inspected to be clean, the conditions are safe for women, and adequate instruments are available to treat any emergencies arising from an abortive procedure. This legislation protects women and seeks to align itself with the will of the voter. This is not government by edict, but allows voters to decide what type of state they'd like to live in when it's put on the ballot. With Amendment 3, voters were presented with a false dichotomy. Advertising went along these lines: pass Amendment 3 or women will die in our hospitals. They were told that women could not get care for ectopic pregnancies or miscarriages. These commercialized statements were blatantly false. The legislation presented today ensures, via our Constitution, that a woman's access to health care in case of miscarriages, ectopic pregnancies, and other medical emergencies shall not be infringed upon by the state. This legislation protects women. Because of Amendment 3's ambiguous language as to whether or not it legalized transgender surgeries on children under a loose interpretation of reproductive health care, the Abortion Action Missouri, formerly NARAL, posted on social media that the new right to reproductive freedom did include gender-affirming care. This is a leftist interpretation, not mine. The leftist National Women's Law Center also states that gender-affirming care is included in reproductive health care. HJR 73, on the other hand, says that no transgender transition surgeries shall be knowingly performed on children under 18 years of age. This legislation doesn't apply to surgeries, drugs, or hormones to treat children born with medically verifiable disorders of sex development or treat other issues unrelated to the purpose of gender transitions. Let our children grow into adulthood where they can make these decisions for themselves having the cognitive ability to do so. This legislation protects kids. Lastly, and probably the most important concern to those who voted for Amendment 3, is that this legislation allows for abortions to be performed or induced in case of medical emergencies, fetal anomaly, rape, or incest. It's my contention that this is what many of the voters wanted who voted for Amendment 3. Missourians did not vote for abortion on demand at 9 months or past the age of fetal viability. This legislation will protect many infants in the womb and see a renewed focus on the sanctity of life, envisioning a culture of life in Missouri. Let me be perfectly clear. Life begins at conception. As I said in committee, this can be scientifically and scripturally proven and is an intuitive understanding of all human beings. We heard in committee of a cluster of cells. Mr. Speaker, I ask that you look behind me, on either side of yourself, in the gallery and roundabout. We all began the same way, starting out as a cluster of cells, and even our state constitution declares that life begins at conception. The voters understand this and will support this HJR when they vote. But because we seek to understand the will of many voters and present legislation that more accurately reflects the will of the voter, abortions in this HJR may be performed or induced in the case of rape or incest no later than 12 weeks gestational age of the unborn child. For those who believe, as I do, that life begins at conception, I ask that they consider what voting for this legislation means. HJR 73 provides for protections for women's health. It protects children, and it protects possibly tens of thousands of infants in the womb. This is pro-life legislation that can and will pass muster of the Missouri voter because it allows for the exceptions that they may have voted for prior. Amendment 3 simply went too far and harms women. This legislation has the support of many pro-life organizations, including Missouri Right to Life. It's been well vetted and will allow the people, not us, the people to decide. Missourians deserve to be presented with better options at the ballot box, options that are more in line with their values and that aren't marketed to them in a deceptive manner. I encourage good people on both sides of the aisle to protect women and children and to enshrine language in our Constitution that does just that. Missourians believe in a culture of life. HJR 73 is not about perfection. It's about doing what we can to present the voters with a viable option that isn't hidden behind slick marketing campaigns paid with money from God knows where. HJR 73 seeks to protect women, children, and innocent life. I'll now take any questions and encourage those who wish to speak on the issue as the people's elected representatives we are about to do. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Discussion on the topic. Lady from St. Louis County.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To speak on the bill.
Proceed, lady.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First, I want to thank the gentleman from Taney for championing an issue such as this. I think it's very important to understand that fathers should have a say. They should be involved in the conversation of abortion and reproductive health care. I thought long and hard about what to say. I wrote some stuff down. I'm not so great on prepared speeches. But I really searched my soul. I prayed a lot. And I just couldn't come up with anything that I thought was exact enough to put down on a piece of paper and to read to you all. So there's a couple things that I want to say. Amendment 3 passed in my district, not by a large margin, but it did pass. Since then, I have spoken with hundreds of people from both sides of the aisle, Republicans, Democrats, and everybody in between, about what they felt that Amendment 3 actually did and what it didn't do. And what I came up with after speaking to these folks was there's some big voids in Amendment 3. The void of safety for women. And that's really what matters. It matters if we save babies, absolutely, but it matters also if we protect women from botched procedures that have no recourse. It matters when women go in for procedures like this, that they go into a regulated facility that is required to have safety standards. But we talked about something else that was really, really important. We talked about what happens when a minor goes in. Who can take a minor? Who can't take a minor? Can a teacher? Can a parent? Does a parent have to be involved at all? And we talked about the recourse on procedures that go wrong. If I go in for foot surgery and something goes terribly wrong, I can call an attorney and say, do I have any recourse against this physician for botching a foot surgery? And maybe that foot is messed up for the rest of my life. But the language of Amendment 3 was written so vaguely that it's completely up to judicial interpretation, and there's no standard set for that. I can't support that. And many people that I spoke to in my district, they had no idea. It's an unintended consequence, I think, that people had no idea was a product of Amendment 3. Not to mention vague language on healthcare professional. I spoke to a young lady who was for Amendment 3. She voted for it, and she said, well, I asked her, I said, are you aware, I said, if you're going in for an abortion, do you want that to be performed by a doctor? And she said, yes. And I said, well, in Amendment 3, the word physician doesn't appear. You don't actually have to be a doctor to perform an abortion. So that bothered me. And in talking to hundreds of people across not only my district, but the state, they weren't really aware that the unintended consequences of language such as this was actually what they were going to get. Some were, absolutely. But the unintended consequences of Amendment 3 and what it has brought to our state have bigger and cause bigger repercussions than we can even fathom. I asked one young lady, actually she was probably more my age, not so young anymore, but I asked her if something happened to her daughter during an abortion, would she want to be able to sue the doctor, to have any kind of recourse at all? And she said, absolutely. And I said, well, under Amendment 3, you cannot. So I hope that you hear my heart when I say, I have put myself in position, whether you believe it or not, of women that have been raped. I can't imagine. It guts me to think about that. And we had a great conversation about that this morning. It makes me absolutely sick to think that this is what some women feel is the only way out of a situation. But at what point do we step in and say, as a state, as a legislative body, that all of us, regardless of our thoughts and feelings on issues, whether we agree or we don't, we came here to protect people, to take care of the people in our districts. I believe that on both sides of the aisle. I believe that our folks over here want safety. I think that the folks over there want safety. And that's what this bill does. I also talked to Mr. Speaker, how much time do I have left?
9 minutes and 29 seconds.
Oh, goodness. Okay, I don't need all that. But I talked to people about exceptions for rape and incest and fetal anomaly. And overwhelmingly, many of them, not all, but overwhelmingly they told me, didn't I vote for that? Amendment 3 does that. And while no, I will be honest with you, I don't believe that we're just going to have a 9-month-old babies, because to me they're 9 months old in the womb as well, but 9-month-old babies in the womb being aborted every day. At least, Lord Jesus, I pray not. But I do believe that the vagueness of Amendment 3 leaves it up to that. And so, Mr. Speaker, in this body, I believe we try to do our best to protect folks. And I think that that's what House Joint Resolution 73 aims to do. And I think that, the people have another crack at this. And their voice will be heard. Mr. Speaker, I thank you for the time.
Further discussion, lady from St. Louis County.
To speak on the HJR.
Proceed, lady.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I don't know who we think we are to assume that the people did not know what they were voting for on the same day they voted for us. I suppose they knew what they were voting for when they voted for us, but I would beg to differ, given that I've seen some of you all throw back a few at night. I've heard some of you talk about Jesus on this floor and talk about a woman's hind parts down at the bar. Who do we think we are? I've heard some of you read out loud. Now all of a sudden we know what's best for the people. It's funny when we dilly-dally and choose when the people know best and when they can't. We use meritocracy so much in here, we think that that's actually how we got here. This is not a meritocracy. This is a popularity contest. Meritocracy is how those people who perform abortions got their job. I don't need you to sympathize with me. I need you to mind your business. I don't want sympathy. Leave me alone with for privacy until it's women. I want to get pregnant. I don't know if I have to ask the governor first, because obviously my vagina is not mine. It belongs to the state of Missouri, apparently. I am sick and tired of people who think an IUD is a landmine, telling me that the people I live by didn't understand what they were voting for. When some of us don't know the difference between a hysterectomy and a mastectomy. It's getting old and it's getting tired. They knew enough to vote for you. We got to pay for people's penis pills. I wouldn't even be halfway amenable if we said that we were going to stop paying for abortions if y'all leave us alone. You think you're stopping abortions with these ridiculous bills? You're not. You're stopping safe, legal abortions. People are going to still have abortions. So if you want to be pro-life, let's try being pro-quality of life first. This is the same body who wants to demand senior citizens work so that they can get unemployment or disability or have to apply for jobs. What are we talking about here? We're so busy being dystopian, we do very little for quality of life. You want to do something for the children? Do something for those foster kids. Let's close down these so-called religious rants where they feeling on the children. Let's do that first. Stop making it seem like a woman's worth is just between our legs. For God's sake, goodness gracious. We just had a hearing talking about abortion where we would charge a victim of rape and incest with murder while her rapist would get less time for violating her human rights. And y'all have the nerve to sit here and talk about science and think the world is 2,000 years old. And y'all gonna tell me about science. The same people who say, I don't believe in pronouns. I is a pronoun. Meritocracy. Power is to the people, and there should be some humility around here when we sit here and talk about what people don't understand. The only thing that people don't understand is the way y'all flip when you get here, telling them that you would be their voice when you get here. And then you decide to do the will of the people who write you checks. That's all I have to say, Mr. Speaker, because I know that my party is going to read some of the testimony that the people weren't able to get when we heard this nonsense. The sixth iteration, this bill has more ups and downs than the bankhead bouncing you talking about has been vetted. Which version of it? It was slaw and trash then, and it's slaw and trash now. And just no one understand, we're not going to stop. The will of the people is going to continue, and in the event the governor signs it, it'll be me outside with them clipboards getting the signatures again, like we did after y'all did this foolishness in 2019, where I had to sit and tell my colleague there is no such thing as consensual rape. But y'all know better. The people didn't know better, but consensual rape and calling rapists gentlemen. We're going to put it back on the ballot, and we're going to overturn this again. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Further discussion, gentleman from Randolph.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, to speak on this HJR. I filed HJR 73 in January of this year. This vital legislation is designed to protect women and children and promote a culture of life in Missouri. House Joint Resolution 73, only upon voter approval, would amend the state constitution by repealing Article 1, Section 36, which was added in Amendment 3, and adopt a new section relating to reproductive health care. The citizens in my district voted against Amendment 3 by 63% against, with only 37% in favor. In fact, only 7 counties voted in favor of Amendment 3 across the state. This legislation provides for abortion exceptions in cases of rape, incest, medical emergency, or fetal anomaly. Amendment 3 legalized essentially all abortions and removed all safety considerations such as the health and safety inspections, licensing for those performing abortions, parental consent for minors receiving abortions, and the ability to sue in cases of malpractice or neglect in abortion procedures. The citizens that I have met with want the exceptions that we have in HJR 73, exceptions for rape and incest, life of the mother, and fetal anomaly, any medical condition where the results would result in a non-viable child. It also enshrines in the Constitution carriage for miscarriage care and other health and safety issues for women and children. I think there is a relatively broad consensus across the state among voters for these provisions. HJR 73 gives voters the opportunity to improve health and safety standards for women and children, including the protecting Missourians from medical malpractice, ensuring access to care for medical emergencies, ectopic pregnancies, and miscarriages, requiring physicians performing abortions to have nearby hospital admitting privileges, reinstituting health and safety inspections at abortion facilities, returning parental control and consent for minors receiving medical procedures, clarifying definitions and providing clear guidance on previously vague and widely disputed language. With this HJR, we aren't changing the law or the Constitution, but we are, if this were to pass, it would be passed by the vote of the people, and they would be able to vote on the exceptions for abortion that they want and what protections they want for women and children as they pursue their reproductive health care. I support the substitute language offered on this amendment as proposed in HCS HJR 73, and I encourage the body to vote on this language that's presented as a consensus building approach to support life in Missouri. Thank you, Speaker.
Further discussion, the lady from St. Louis City.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To speak on the bill.
Proceed.
Thank you. I want to start by expressing my gratitude to the members of this body who have shared deeply personal stories about their own experiences with abortion. As a social worker, I'm trained to actively listen when people are expressing emotion, to listen with an open mind, and to meet people where they are. For so many of you, what I've heard is that you care about this issue because someone you love had an abortion. Someone I love had an abortion too. In fact, many people I love have had abortions. And these people span decades of different ages and generations. Some had abortions before Roe, some after, some post. And almost all are living with stigma. Because by weaponizing abortion and using a medical procedure as a political pawn, we create more stigma for those whose lived experience is having an abortion. By banning abortion, you do not prevent people from having them. You create unsafe and stigmatizing narratives which cause harm and sometimes regret. As long as humans have sex, we will have abortions because we will have pregnancies. So let's stop creating more generations of pain because of a medical procedure. And with that, I'd like to read from Steph in Jackson County. This is the testimony from the other night. I am here to oppose HJR 73. I am 56 years old and a high school teacher, a mother, and one of 1,538,600 Missourians who voted yes on Amendment 3. The people of this state spoke clearly with conviction. For much of my life, I saw abortion as an abstract political issue. It wasn't until I began to look into the eyes of my students, young people, scared, vulnerable, and desperate for support, that I began to understand the real faces behind the policies we create. A year ago, one of my students, bright, kind, and full of potential, tried to end her life. She was pregnant. The child was not conceived in love or safety. It was the result of abuse at the hands of someone meant to be her caregiver. Because of our state's abortion restrictions, she saw no way out, no access, no options, no hope. And because she couldn't get the help she needed in time, she made a decision no woman should ever feel they have to make. She survived the suicide attempt, but barely. The physical damage was so severe that she will never be able to have children. Her ability to make that choice for herself in the future was taken away, just like her sense of control and safety was taken away in the moment. And it all started because she didn't have access to care. This wasn't just a tragedy. It was preventable. It didn't have to happen. Recently, my own daughter gave birth to my grandson. He's 6 months old now and a joy to all of us. But her pregnancy wasn't easy. There were complications, serious ones. And I lay awake many nights terrified that something might go wrong, terrified that she might not receive the care she needed if decisions about her body were left to lawmakers and not to her and her doctors. I have 6 grandchildren. I've watched both my daughter and daughter-in-law go through pregnancy and childbirth. When abortion was legal in Missouri, I never worried whether they would be safe. I never feared they would be denied care in an emergency. I trusted the system to support them, to give them options if something went wrong. That trust disappeared when abortion was taken away. Suddenly, my daughters were no longer fully able to protect themselves in the system that once gave me peace of mind. It became clear to me that their safety and their lives were now subject to uncertainty and delay, not compassion or care. To each of you sitting here today, I know some of you are parents, some of you are grandparents, and many of you carry the responsibility of protecting this state's future and our future, the children of our future. Please think about the people you love most in this world. Think about your daughters, your nieces, your grandchildren. If they were in danger, if they needed care, if their lives were and futures dependent on a choice, you would want to deserve every access to that option available. You would want them safe. You would want them supported. You would want them to have a voice. And speaking of voices, we must not ignore the voices of the people. They have spoken. Amendment 3 was passed through a democratic process. Overturning it with HJR 73 doesn't just take away care, it takes away the will of the people. That should matter to every person in this room, no matter of your political beliefs. This is what the conversation around abortion must return to: real people, real lives, my daughter's safety, my student's survival, a woman's right to control her body should never be up for debate. Abortion is not about politics. It's about autonomy, safety, and dignity. HJR, this is from Suzanne. HJR is another attempt proposed by a man to control women's access to contraceptive care and choices, as well as the attempt to override the will of the people. Accept the will of the voters and move on to something useful. The proposed legislation includes exceptions for rape and sexual assault, with the requirement that women face repetitive trauma, first, in the act of sexual violence against their person, and second, during an invasive medical and forensic exam, and third, through reliving the trauma through the required reporting to law enforcement. The National Sexual Violence Resource Center reports 1 in 5, or 20% of all women in the U.S. have experienced some form of sexual assault in their lifetimes. According to the National Crime Victim Survey in 2023, less than half of rapes and sexual assaults are reported to law enforcement. HJR 73 would cause additional trauma to sexual violence victims while also failing to address instances of sexual violence against children who may not understand what was done to them. How does an 11-year-old child know how to report rape? What happens when the rapist is a family member or authority figure? This legislation fails to recognize the complexities of trauma, the trauma of sexual violence, and how a reporting experience is dehumanizing, especially when female victims have no choice but to report and be interrogated about their rapes to a workforce that is predominantly comprised of men. Missourians voted to protect abortion, and we, the people, understand that every woman's situation is individual, complicated, and should be subjected to input, and not should be subjected to input from elected lawmakers. Health and reproductive care decisions belong between a woman and her health care provider. The first time I was sexually assaulted, I was 4 years old. This is me now. A family member, a trusted caregiver, started sexually and psychologically abusing me when my family moved closer to this person and my parents needed support for childcare. For 2 years, that family member committed violent acts against my small little girl body. As the older sister, I felt it my duty to protect my little sister. One evening, when our family member was watching us, we were both scared and hiding under the bed. I put myself in between my sister and the wall to protect her so that our family member couldn't get to her. After 2 years, we moved out of that city, and that family member lost access. I was sexually assaulted again in high school, and thank goodness I was wearing tights when he tried to force his penis inside of me and wasn't able to finish the attempted rape. Do you know that I can still feel what his hands felt like holding my shoulders down? Do you know that I can still remember how the seat felt under my legs or the smell of his breath? These memories live in my body. And I've done so much therapy and have worked so hard to heal the sexual trauma, but they still exist there. These sexual assaults did not result in pregnancy. If they had, I deserved to make the choice about if I wanted to carry that pregnancy or not, because I didn't have the choice of when, where, and with whom my first sexual and second sexual experiences were. I definitely deserved the choice for myself after of how to take care of my body. Everyone deserves this choice in how they care for their bodies, whether it's gender-affirming care, reproductive health care. These are not weapons to be used in fighting cultural wars. These are real, life-saving medical procedures that affect real Missourians. Please, please stop taking our rights away. I encourage this body to vote no on this bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
For the discussion, lady from Burton.
Mr. Speaker, to speak on House Joint Resolution 73.
Proceed, lady.
Today we gather to discuss a matter that touches the very core of our values, beliefs, and responsibilities as lawmakers. We are here to address the implications of Amendment 3. While this amendment was approved in our state, my county, Burton, expressed a strong opposition with an impressive 79.9% voting against it. I stand here today as a representative of my county and my district. Last November, Amendment 3 passed with a narrow 51.6% under the banner of the Right to Reproductive Freedom Initiative. On the surface, this title may invoke a sense of empowerment and autonomy. Who among us does not wish to celebrate the freedom to make choices about our lives and our bodies? Yet, as we delve deeper into the text of this amendment, we must examine the realities it presents and the implications it holds for our constituents. Amendment 3 revises Article 1 of our Constitution, introducing Section 36, which claims to protect a person's fundamental right to reproductive freedom. It outlines a broad spectrum of reproductive health care decisions, from prenatal care to abortion. While the intention behind this amendment may be a safeguard individual choice, we must scrutinize the language used and the potential consequences that arise from it. Consider Section 4, which states that under no circumstances shall the government deny or interfere with an abortion deemed necessary by a health care professional to protect the life or mental health of the pregnant person. We must pause and reflect. What do we mean by mental health? What is the term person used instead of woman? Could this vague language open the door to interpretations that we cannot foresee? If a woman expresses distress about her pregnancy, does that qualify as a mental health concern? What are the boundaries of this clause, and how might it be misused? Furthermore, we are considering House Joint Resolution 73, which seeks to place this proposal on the ballot for Missouri voters. Why do we find ourselves in this position? Because Amendment 3 is fraught with vague language that could lead to unintended consequences. As lawmakers, it is our duty to clarify and ensure that the rights of women and children are protected, and that the language in our laws is precise and accountable. House Joint Resolution 73 aims to address these concerns by instituting regulations that ensure the safety of abortion facilities and the qualifications of healthcare professionals who operate within them. We have a responsibility to ensure that any woman seeking reproductive care does so in a safe environment, and that there is accountability if something goes wrong. No individual or facility should operate without the risk of liability when lives are at stake. In conclusion, I urge my colleagues to consider the broader implications of Amendment 3 and the necessity of House Joint Resolution 73. We must strive to create a legal framework that prioritizes the health and safety of women and children, while also providing clarity and accountability to our laws. Let us work together to protect the rights of all individuals, ensuring that our decisions reflect our commitment to their well-being and dignity. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Further discussion, lady from St. Louis County District 85.
To speak on the bill.
Proceed, lady.
All right. I'm sitting here listening to a lot of things, and I always put my residents first. So I'm going to read some testimonies that should have been read in that particular committee. I'm opposed to HJR 73. The people voted for Amendment 3 and women's rights to choose what to do with her body. Follow the law. Do your job. Quit wasting time and taxpayers' money trying to override the will of the voters. That is not what you were elected to do. We have real problems in the state that needs to be addressed. Do your job. One more witness. He stated, Missouri voters spoke loud and clear when they passed Amendment 3, HJR 73, spoke to overturn the will of the people. It also seems to redefine reproduction health care by constitutionally banning abortions. The spectrum of reproductive and sexual harassment is already well understood and practiced. The bill oversteps the Missouri legislature authority to impose their definition of reproduction health care on medical practices, disregarding widely accepted clinical standards and evidence-based medicine, as well as disregarding the clear expression bill of Missourians. Now, that was two. Now, this is what I have to say. This is really puzzling to me that the residents of Missouri went to the ballot boxes and cast their votes. They did this in secret. No one knew how they were going to vote. They voted for the proposition, and they voted against prop, or they went on their way. We are wrong to pick apart and say their votes was not of liking. So I'm going to tell them they were wrong to vote this way. Is that what we're going to do up here? This last April election was 8% in the county, and that is very disappointing. In the city, it was very disappointing in the numbers. What I'm trying to say is you keep picking apart the people don't think their votes matter. Every time we don't like something, that's what we're going to do. We're going to pick apart. We need to stop trying to take away the rights as Missourian citizens and tell them how to vote. They need to vote their conscience. My next question, are you going to do this and waste taxpayers' money on the debating decision of the people? Without the people, we would not be here. None of us. When it comes to women's, quit trying to tell me what to do with my body. We don't tell men what to do with yours. What if women does not want to tell what happened to them when it comes to incest that was already brought up and become pregnant? What if pregnancies with tubercle still wears privacy? This should be private in a woman's decision. She has her reason why she doesn't want anyone to know. I don't want to move forward with men's decision because telling you guys what to do with your bodies. What is really hurting to me is how can I go knock on someone's doors and they be telling me, well, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You're not going to listen anyway. That's all you're going to do is pick apart my decision. Again, if a woman want to have an abortion for whatever reason, that should be private. It should be her private decision. We should not tell women what to do with their bodies. I know this election, and the election was a nonpartisan. It wasn't Republicans and wasn't, but the people has spoken. We should not be putting this stuff right back on there, and then now it's really going to confuse them, and guess what? They're not going to vote for it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Further discussion, lady from Jasper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To inquire of the bill handler.
Does the gentleman from Taney yield to the lady from Jasper?
I do.
Proceed.
Thank you. I think one of the things that the people on our side of the aisle want to do is we want to really solidify and clarify what we feel like the people said seemed broad and ambiguous. So I want to just kind of go through some of those things. First of all, the title, this section shall be known as the Right to Reproductive Freedom Initiative. Why did they use Reproductive Freedom Initiative if this was about restoring abortion back to Missourians?
I think, again, that's an issue of muddying the waters, and one of the reasons that the amendment passed. I'm not saying that the voter didn't know what they were voting for. I think they did. And I think they were voting for the exceptions, including rape and incest, that we have in HJR 73. We have clarifying language. We have definition of terms. Even the presentation that they'll see on the ballot is very precise. The people, the voters, will know exactly what they're voting for, and I think they'll vote in favor of protecting women.
We agree that the title seemed broad and ambiguous. So we go to Section 2, and it says, the government shall not deny or infringe upon a person's fundamental right to reproductive freedom, which is the right to make and carry out decisions in all matters relating to reproductive health care, including but not limited to prenatal care, childbirth, postpartum care, birth control, abortion care, miscarriage care, and respectful birthing conditions. Using reproductive freedom in all matters, including but not limited to, do you feel like that was pretty broad and ambiguous?
Of course it is. Without a definition of terms, it's up to individual interpretation. We want to present something in HJR 73 that's very specific so that the voter knows and can make an informed decision when they vote.
So page 2, line 41, page 3, line 58, 68, and 78, they clarify those in our HJR 73. Let's go on to Section 3. The right to reproductive freedom shall not be denied, interfered with, delayed, or otherwise restricted. Any denial, interference, delay, or restriction of the right to reproductive freedom shall be presumed invalid. Does this give any age parameters to Amendment 3?
No, it does not.
So a person could, a 15-year-old could show up at a clinic and demand abortion, and could they say, wait, we're going to call your parents?
Not according to Amendment number 3. There's no parental consent. We're putting back in safeguards that parents can safely make decisions along with their children about what should be done.
So any denial, delay, or restriction purposely excluded, in our opinions, parental consent. So page 2, line 29 through 30, just adds back in parental consent. So we believe that that left it pretty broad and ambiguous when it came to the age restrictions. Is that right?
Right, I think so. And again, the clarifying language in HJR 73 is very important for parents desiring to be involved in their the decisions that their children may make.
And I think that the lady from Burton made up a good point that it's also used the word person seeking care. So lines 6, 21, 28, and 35 and 39 put woman back in this because Amendment 3 pretty much excluded women when it was talking about women's health care.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's move on to Section 4. Notwithstanding subsection 3, it goes on to say that the government shall not deny, interfere with, delay, or otherwise restrict an abortion that is in good faith judgment of the treating healthcare professional. Again, the lady from Burton touched on that. Healthcare professional, would that include a dietitian?
It's quite possible according to Amendment 3.
Would that include a speech pathologist?
Absolutely.
Would that include a medical billing coder, since those are all healthcare professionals?
The vagueness of Amendment 3 was found in that the voters, when they voted for it, again, I think most voters were walking into the voting booth thinking rape and incest exceptions. The vagueness of Amendment 3 could allow for abortion on demand up till 9 months.
Right, and so we want to make sure that in our HJR 73 that we define healthcare workers, and page 2, 13 through lines 20, give us really clear definitions of parameters of whose credentials would be accepted as a healthcare provider. We actually call it a physician in HJR. So we felt like Section 4 seemed pretty broad and ambiguous. Is that correct?
It did, and it even removed admitting privileges for the doctor to take someone to the hospital in case the procedure went awry. Again, this legislation, HJR 73, protects women, and I think Missourians will agree with that.
Well, and I think it's interesting that Section 4 called it a pregnant person, not a pregnant woman. That seemed, when we were providing health care to women, that we would say pregnant women. It's not offensive to women to be pregnant.
To my knowledge, over the generation, only women have had babies.
Thank you. So Section 5, no person shall be penalized, prosecuted, or otherwise subjected to adverse action. This is great as someone who's married to a physician. So is this blanket immunity for physicians that would cause harm to someone during a procedure?
That's the way it looks to me. Are the proper instruments there to protect the health of the women? As the the attending physician been given the licensure and had the exams on actually to know how to do this procedure. Again, this legislation protects women. Amendment 3 harmed women.
Yeah, line 10 through 20, doctors will be held to a higher standard. Section 6, the government shall not discriminate against any person providing or obtaining reproductive health care or assisting another person. Would the Missouri legislature be able to say taxpayer dollars are not allowed to be used for abortion if we're not allowed to discriminate against people seeking abortion?
According to the HJR, it eliminates the state funding, HJR 73, the state funding for abortions.
Thank you. So that really made something that was broad and ambiguous, restrained it a little bit.
Sure.
To speak on the bill.
Proceed, lady.
Unlike legislation passed the General Assembly, initiative petitions do not go through the same vetting process. There are no committee hearings, expert testimonies, public input, or floor debates to refine and clarify the language before it reaches the voters. Many Missourians have expressed concerns that, in the past, we went too far in one direction, no abortions with virtually no exceptions. Because the language of Amendment 3 was written in an overly broad, vague, and ambiguous manner, HJR 73 is a response to the voters' desire to reestablish certain exceptions. By returning this revised revision to the people with clearly defined terms and limits, we honor both the will of the voters and uphold the legislators' responsibility to craft laws that are specific, understandable, not broad, and enforceable. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
For discussion, gentleman from St. Louis County District 72.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To inquire of the gentlelady from the 88th District, please.
The 80th, you say?
88th.
Does the lady from the 88th yield to the gentleman from St. Louis County?
I do.
Proceed.
Hi, good day, lady.
Good morning, gentlemen.
Thank you. How are you doing?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm well. I'm well myself. Fantastic. So I just had a couple questions. This bill went through your committee, correct?
Yes.
And you had a pretty full committee room, didn't you?
Which time? Both, yes.
When you heard this bill?
Yes, the committee substitute for 73, yes.
Yes. And you did something a little bit different. You just allowed people to put their name in and whether they're for or against this legislation, but didn't take actual witness testimony. Is that correct?
That's partly correct. So we did 5 for and 5 against, and then we did the rest of the folks in the room were able to come up, give for or against, and their testimony sheet, as well as their name and where they're from.
You are aware you can take recesses on a committee, you can keep hearing the same bill over multiple days, that sort of thing. Is there some reason you decided not to hear specific testimonies from folks?
There is, and thank you. I'm really glad that you brought that up. I was wondering when I would get a chance to explain this. So before going into the hearing room that evening, it was brought to my attention that a staged protest was being practiced in the overflow room. They were also asking for security. And unfortunately, at that time, we had security already in the room where we were, and the folks that had come up to testify were coming into that room.
Well, I was in the overflow room for a while. I didn't hear or see anything about a staged protest when I was there, but you could be hearing rumors or something happened when I wasn't in the room.
Sure. So I made the decision that, considering we had heard and also exec out of committee already the exact language that is now in this bill with one minor tweak of a word, I made that decision based on keeping decorum in a hearing room. We are under obligation to be under decorum in this chamber.
Absolutely.
That also rolls over to the hearing rooms in the House. And in this room, as the speaker's responsibility to keep decorum, in a hearing room, chairs are responsible for keeping that order. So
that's why y'all have gavels.
So what's that?
That's why y'all have gavels.
So, well, I don't really love the gavel, I'm not going to lie to you. But in doing so, I did call for order several different times. There continued to be outbursts, and when a specific individual got up to speak, everyone very blatantly was doing the chant. They all knew exactly what to say. It was very staged kind of thing. And gentlemen, to your point, I asked the curator to clear the room as to not make the committee and the staff afraid of what was happening. And then I called them back in. I said, we will stand at ease until the order has been restored. I invited everyone back in, and that's kind of how that went.
Well, lady, I think there was some agitation with the witnesses. I really think that's part of what was going on there. Because I watched the hearing. I think a whole bunch of us watched the hearing. And I think the agitation resulted from the original announcement that you'll take some testimony, but other than that, people that had driven 3 or 4 hours weren't going to be able to speak their piece. And you know, we're talking about a constitutional amendment. I think that's kind of a big deal. And it disappoints me, lady, I want to say this to your face, it disappoints me that you don't think it was worth the time on your behalf and the committee's behalf to sit down and endure the testimony. You know, 12 people showed up against the bill. Do you know how many filed testimony in support? 12 people showed up in support of the bill. You know how many people submitted testimony against it?
I don't know the exact number, but I read many of them over the
545.
weekend. Those people were not in the room, no.
A good chunk of them were, though.
And you know what? Let me make a point to that.
Please.
The one thing that I do, that I have thought about, is unfortunately the actions of many affect the few. And there were many in that room, and I shouldn't say many, there were few in that room, who absolutely had the utmost respect to come and have their voices heard. And I wish that the actions of the many did not overflow onto those people, because there were those folks that wanted to have a good dialogue, to talk to their committee members. And unfortunately, I had to make a decision in that moment, knowing that a protest was being planned for the hearing room. And we can disagree on that, gentlemen. We disagree on a lot of things in this. Yeah, absolutely.
And, and lady, I appreciate that we've had this conversation civilly. Remember, decorum.
Yeah, absolutely.
However, I do believe you made the wrong decision. And I think that Missourians have a right, even if it makes us uncomfortable or makes us tired or makes us sore the next day, to hear them out. And lady, I thank you for the inquiry.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
You as well.
Mr. Speaker, to speak on the bill, please.
Proceed, gentlemen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have a list of names in my hand. I was going to read them out. They're people, we're not going to have the ability to read their testimony aloud. A lot of folks are reading folks' testimony out loud. I can tell you about my constituent who lost her sister. When she was a little girl, she lost her sister to an illegal abortion. It was done improperly because she didn't have access to safe legal abortion. I can tell you about my friend in college who is being raped by her father. Her father was a preacher, and his student preacher, you know, the guy got his degree and was learning how to actually run a church, was raping her. And she went to her father with this, and her father didn't want to start any problems with the church. And she wound up getting pregnant and having to have an abortion. Gee, should we have called the parents on that one? I don't know. But, Mr. Speaker, let me offer testimony. My ex-wife and I, on our 4th pregnancy, we had a lot of issues. And I got to tell you, I've always wanted kids. We got to our 3rd month, Mr. Speaker. You know, at the 3rd month, you feel safe. You can tell people about it because you're actually going to have a baby. And she started spotting. And we rushed to the doctor. We went to the ER. And I could see the look on the woman's face during the ultrasound. I already knew before a word was spoken that we'd lost another. And I stood here on this floor during House Bill 126 and argued with somebody who doesn't have the slightest idea about medical terminology about what an abortion was, because my wife had to have an abortion that day. That's the type of thing. See, we get this microphone. I get to give you a testimony. These poor people that everybody's going to stand up and talk about came here, drove here, spent time on a constitutional amendment, Mr. Speaker, to offer their view, to offer their experiences, to offer the things that they see, good or bad, support or against. The truth of the matter is, we have a responsibility. We took an oath. And a constitutional amendment, that's not a joke. You know, I read this thing, it reads like statute. That's not what you do with a constitution. There's a whole bunch of stuff in here that we shouldn't be monkeying with. That's up for statute. That's up for regulation. That's up for the changing whims of society, because the Constitution is supposed to be a framework. You know, the people made a clear decision last election cycle, and you know what? Put it on the ballot again. Go ahead. Everybody's going to have to spend a whole bunch of money, including the state of Missouri. The pros and cons are going to get out in the street again, and you're going to lose. It's going to be an embarrassment because you have no idea what you're talking about. You have no idea the experiences of the people that you represent. And I keep hearing, well, my county, overwhelmingly. Your county of what? This is a popular vote. We have 6 million plus people in the state of Missouri. There are counties out there with less of a population than my district. That's why some of y'all represent 4 counties. We have several representatives from 1 county. Population is the thing. Missourians, each individual, has a right to their opinion in the say-so of how this state is run. That's how it works. That's why we all represent an equal amount of people. It's not about geography, it's about individual rights and individual opinions. So, Mr. Speaker, this personally affects me. If I wasn't in this body and didn't have this microphone, I would have been cut off because I would have made the trip to speak in that room. And I would have been told for or against and leave, sir. And I probably wouldn't have. I probably would have said something more. I probably would have been gavelled down because it's my right to speak. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Further discussion, lady from St. Charles County.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To speak on the resolution.
Proceed, lady.
Thank you. As I rise today, I do so not only as a legislator, but as a woman, and as a mother and a daughter, and a leader in the great state who has listened closely with both ears and open heart. I sat through hours of testimony. I have seen tears on the faces of women who were afraid. I have heard trembling voices of families and doctors, advocating with passion and pleading for understanding. And I want to say this clearly. I hear you. I honor your pain, and I respect your perspective. And I know your advocacy comes from love, for the love of women, for freedom and dignity. But leadership calls us to look beyond the moment. It calls us to consider those we cannot see, those who cannot testify, those whose lives are taken before they've even taken a breath. And HJR 73 is not about power or punishment. It is not about silencing anyone. It is about the truth, and it's about dignity and about life. This resolution does not override the will of the people. It is giving the people a new opportunity to reconsider a matter that's not political, but deeply personal and profoundly human. I do not stand here to judge anyone. I stand here to protect women who feel they've been left in a crisis, to protect doctors who want to practice with integrity, and yes, to protect unborn children who have never had a chance to be held, to be named, or to be loved. We cannot claim to champion women if we do not also champion their capacity to choose life when they are supposed to, when they're supported, and when they are empowered, and when they are truly seen. This is what HJR 73 offers. Not division, but a chance to unite. Not opposition, but a path towards healing. Not shame, but standard of care that uplifts every life's involvement. As a woman of this House and as a representative of the people of Missouri, as a leader who believes in strength, courage, and compassion of this state, I rise in support of this resolution. Because I believe we are strong enough to hold space for both compassion and conviction. Because I believe women are powerful, and so are their children that we carry. Because I believe Missouri is ready to lead, not in fear, but in faith. Not in policy, politics, but in principle. Not by force, but by love. So let the people speak again. Let us lead them there with honesty and grace. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Further discussion, gentlemen from Jackson, from a microphone other than your own.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To speak on the HJR.
Proceed, gentlemen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, to begin with, we've heard a lot about how people didn't know what they were voting for on this. And I looked through that testimony, and I encourage my colleagues who are here to spend some of the time while they're here looking through that testimony. I didn't see anyone who said, you know, I voted yes for that, but I just found out what was in there. I was misunderstood. I'm not saying there's not people like that. I'm saying that of the hundreds of people who put in testimony, none of them said that. I'm also rising today to try to give voice, as we've talked about, give voice to the people who came to the Children and Families Committee hearing and who were not allowed to have voice of their own. So I would like to start by giving voice to Stacy. Stacy said, I attended the hearing today, but was prevented from testifying by the limitation on speakers that conveniently accommodated nearly every attendee supporting the bill. Therefore, I am instead submitting written testimony. To be clear, I voted for Amendment 3. I knew exactly what the amendment covered. I was not misled in any way. I still support Amendment 3, exactly as it is currently written. You are elected representatives. You should support the will of the people instead of taking every opportunity to thwart it. Reproductive health care is a fundamental right, and women alone have agency over their bodies. I oppose HJR 73, as well as any other legislation that fundamentally modifies Amendment 3. Mr. Speaker, I'd also like to speak on behalf of Sarah. Sarah submitted testimony and said, I live in St. Louis County. I'm writing to oppose HJR 73 because I am one of the more than 1,538,600 Missourians who voted yes on Amendment 3. This is not a partisan issue. Republicans, Democrats, and independents from across the state collected signatures, signed the petition, and voted yes on Amendment 3 to establish Missourians' right to abortion without politicians intervening. The majority of Missourians voted to remove politicians and others and uninvolved parties from our personal medical decision-making, like abortion care and all sexual and reproductive care. You are not qualified to make these decisions for other people. It's not within your job description. Your job is to protect and fulfill the will of the people. Vote no on HJR 73. And I want to finish with one other quote. I think the question should be, what are you going to do when people vote? And what I've told people is that we should respect the will of the people, and we will. It'll be the law of the land, and we have to go forward as the people decide. The people are going to vote, and we have to respect the wishes of the people. I don't think I could say it any better than the gentleman from the 30th District, our Speaker of the House, did last year, less than 6 months ago. So please, let's respect the will of the 1,538,600 voters who voted for Amendment 3. Let's respect what they came out to do, and let's vote no on this attack on women's rights and voters' rights. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
For the discussion, lady from McLeod.
To speak on the bill, Mr. Speaker.
Proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I also serve on the Children and Families Committee. I also had the opportunity to hear many heart-wrenching stories I heard many words that I wish we didn't even have to say, such as rape and incest, and my heart breaks with every story. My heart breaks for women who have gone through those situations, for women who have to make these difficult decisions. And as someone who has spent the bulk of my career on all sides of this issue, working with women who are working to make this decision, working with children as they're placed in adoption, working with foster care children, working with women who have been through sexual assault, I stand today to support HJR 73. And I just want to remind the body as to why and what the intent of this legislation actually is. And for those who serve on the committee with me, you've heard me say this. You've heard me bring it back to this common ground that I hope we can come to a place where we want to say, we can agree that safety for women has to be priority. Of course, we want to protect children at all stages of life. But what HJR 73 really seeks to do is to make sure a few very simple things. That medical procedures are actually performed by qualified physicians. That if someone is harmed during a medical procedure, they actually have legal resource to come back if they've been harmed. That we actually do give parental consent so that not only are parents involved in these decisions, but minors have support from their parents as they work through these difficult decisions. So there are a lot of emotions as we discuss this topic, and we have them all across the chamber, and they're all valid, and we hear them all. But I think we have to remember that the intent of this legislation is to go back to constituents and go back to the voice of the people. And I'm hearing my constituents loud and clear. Those who voted no and those who voted yes want an opportunity to go back to the ballot and make sure that these safety measures are put in place, that the loopholes that Amendment 3 left open are tightened up. That way we can say that we've done everything we can as voters and as legislators to protect children and women in the state of Missouri. So today I want to make it clear that I support HJR 73 because you'll always find me protecting women, protecting children, protecting families, and that's really what we're trying to do with this. So thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Further discussion, Letty from Jackson, District 24, from a microphone other than your own.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, to speak on the bill.
Proceed.
Okay, so I have knocked a lot of doors in your all's districts talking to Republicans. We've had a conversation at the door. You know what? They brought it up. I didn't bring it up. I asked them what issues they were concerned about this election cycle. Abortion was number one. Guns was second. And this was talking to Republican voters as well, okay? Let's just make that clear. These were not Democrats. They were Republicans. We had clear conversations about what Amendment 3 is. On top of that, they said that they were going to support Amendment 3 because they saw that there was gray areas. When Roe v. Wade was overturned, there was gray areas that affected their families, affected somebody they loved. And they knew there's consequences. So that's why they supported the passing of Amendment 3. But then their concern was, and continues to still be, is that they vote for it, and then guess what the Missouri General Assembly does? They undo the will of the voters, which is exactly what you've been doing. So I want to quote somebody who was from Jefferson County who came here to testify who's pregnant. So when I voted yes on Amendment 3, I did so carefully and thoughtfully. I read the amendment, did my research, and decided to vote yes. I was voting for the right to make my own medical decisions. I was voting for my daughter who will be born into this world soon. I was voting for every woman who has faced impossible decisions and for every family that deserves their privacy to make them. I believed in that vote. I believed that meant something, and now you're telling me it doesn't. So, when we sit here and talk about abortion clinics, and I hear you all say and continue to say that, oh, we want safe abortions, and we want to make sure that the physicians are real physicians and everything. Yeah, we do too. Guess what? They are. All abortion clinics in Missouri are required to have safety checks and regulations in place. And yes, a patient in Missouri can sue an abortion provider for malpractice if there is harm. It's there. It's there. I also hear you all continue to talk about the protection of women. Well, let's talk about protecting women. Because years ago, y'all passed a gun bill that here in the state of Missouri, there's a loophole where domestic violence offenders can legally possess firearms and buy them. Y'all haven't even passed that bill yet. A representative on your side filed it every year who is 100% Second Amendment rights, but understood that we needed to protect women. But you wouldn't even bring it up for a vote. And so you want to sit here and talk about protecting women? Well, let's talk about that. Let's protect women. But maybe you should listen to us too, because how many times do we have these conversations on the floor and we talk about sexual assault victims or survivors? Well, guess what? I'm one of them, just like most of us here in the body. You know how that feels? It's not something that everybody needs to go through to have an understanding about it. You should just listen to us. You should make it very clear that you trust us with the decisions of our own body. You should not be in that doctor's office. You want to talk about how you all are the pro-life party? Not very pro-life. When you continue to sit there and defund education, when you defund unemployment, when you try to defund SNAP benefits. Not very pro-life. Again, what are we doing here? Undoing the will of the voters once again. Bravo.
Further discussion, lady from St. Francis, from a microphone other than your own.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To speak on the resolution.
Proceed, lady.
I stand in favor of House Joint Resolution 73 and in favor of protecting women and protecting life. I want to share my heart for women in crisis and the support that the pro-life community does offer to those in crisis. I know that there is a lot of discussion over the will of the people, and just to clarify at the beginning of my statement, this is not the legislature making a decision. This is going back to the people so that people can once again make the decision. But I also hear a lot of people accusing pro-life people of not caring, and that is not the experience that I have had. I've witnessed thousands of people who truly care about their neighbors, their family in difficult situations. I've seen people give their money, their time, their homes to help women in difficult situations, help them find housing, help them find employment, help them have diapers and wipes. I have gone on weekends and nights and mornings running to the store to buy pack and plays and diapers. I've watched children for mothers, taken women to the doctor, taught women how to drive, And I'm not the only one. There are thousands of us who truly invest in helping families succeed to get out of the difficult situations that they are in. Abortion doesn't walk with women that way. It says that it gives a solution, but then leaves people in the same situation they were in before having that abortion. My desire is to truly help our state to see that there are other options than abortion, that abortion itself is not a solution. I think this bill addresses some of those high-risk situations that truly are horrific. When a woman's life is at risk, there's an opportunity to save her life in this resolution. When a woman has faced the horrible tragedy of rape and incest, there are exceptions in this resolution. But when it's just the pressures of life, we give women false hope. We actually demean them by saying that they aren't enough to parent and to do life. What women truly need is people walking with them. There's a woman I met who, she had several children and struggled and believed that when she was pregnant, the next time she couldn't do it. She couldn't take on another child. And so she went and had an abortion. And then she started attending parenting classes where I worked. I didn't know her background. Eventually, months in, as she learned and engaged and got supplies for her children, she said that she had had an abortion because she believed that she couldn't take care of another child. It was too much for her. But that was the worst decision of her life. It was horrible, and the emotions that she had after that decision were worse than taking care of any child had ever been. And so she came to these free classes, received the free support and supply and love and care of her mentor, her classmates, the staff, the people who were there to walk with her through a struggle time of life. And she said, I want to know how to be a great mom to my kids so I never feel like I have to make a decision like that again. Things like that are what truly give women power and help and hope. Abortion without any limits, as Amendment 3 is vague enough to provide, lead to situations like a young woman I know. She's a minor. She called our office out of the blue and was bleeding out at school. She had been given abortion pills to take on her own. That's what we're arguing for with Amendment 3, safe and legal abortion. That wasn't safe for her at all. She was given the pills, which is the procedure, sent off on her own to have her abortion. And she's at school. She hadn't told her parents. She didn't want anyone to know. It's supposed to be a private decision between her, whether she's a minor or not, and her provider. And yet, in her time of pain and hemorrhaging, she called a stranger to have someone to talk to while she believed she was dying. That's not care. That's not protecting minors. This joint resolution allows those who care, who are involved in the child's life, to know what's going on. We were eventually able to talk the girl into seeking out medical care, thankfully, and she didn't pass away. But again, Amendment 3 is vague enough that should a judge decide to, there would be no recourse for this family if their daughter had passed away from illegal abortion. We want to protect women. We want to protect their health and safety, but we also want women to know that having a child is not a curse on their life, that they are strong and capable. They can pursue careers, they can pursue family, they can pursue a future. Your life is not over just because you have children. And we are here with those women, to walk with them, to support them, to give, to help make that life possible. And so I stand in support of House Joint Resolution 73. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The representative from Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To inquire of the bill handler.
Does the gentleman from Taney yield, and do you have a clear path?
I do, and I do.
Proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative, for taking my inquiry. I want to go through the bill because I have some confusion on it. And you talked a lot about life starting at conception. Can you tell me more about that?
Sure, that's my belief, that life does begin at conception.
Okay. What is conception to you?
Conception is when the sperm fertilizes the egg, and it's implanted within the womb and begins to grow. The cells begin to divide. That is conception.
So the conception is when the sperm fertilizes the egg. Implantation is a separate thing that usually happens days later.
I appreciate that.
So if life starts at conception, only about half of those fertilized eggs, if that, actually implant. So that would mean there are a lot of lives gone. Would this mean we need to start testing menstrual blood to make sure that there was no fertilized egg so that we know that that's not a crime?
Well, to answer the inquiry, I think that the Missouri Revisor of Statutes 1.205 already states, it's in our code, that life of the human being begins at conception. That was presented to the Revisor of Statutes in 1986. So our law declares that life begins at conception. We may have a different interpretation of that, but it's very clear in Missouri statute. It's already there, and it has been since 1986.
Yeah, we should probably look at that. Are you aware of a doctor shortage in Missouri?
Doctor shortage in Missouri. That's quite probable.
We definitely have one, and I know we've talked about this as we've seen bills of yours in my committee before. Have you looked up since then which medical associations support gender-affirming care for minors?
No, I've not.
Well, I've got a short list. I know this isn't all of them, but it's the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, the American Academy of Dermatology, of Pediatrics, of Physician Assistants, the American Medical Association, the American Nurses Association, the Association of Clinical Endocrinology, of Geriatric Psychiatry, College Health Association, College of Nurse Midwives, College of Obstetricians Gynecologists, of American College of Physicians, American Counseling Association, the Endocrine Society, Federation of Pediatric Organizations, American Urological Association, American Heart Association, American Medical Student Association, American Psychiatric Association, American Psychological Association, American Society of Plastic Surgeons, American Society of Reproductive Medicine, Journal of the American Medical Association, the National Association of Nurse Practitioners in Women's Health, the National Association of Social Workers, Pediatric Endocrine Society, Pediatrics, Texas Medical Association, Texas Pediatric Society. I can go on. Do you think that all of those doctors are incorrect in their assessment?
No, that's not in this legislation.
It is.
It is?
Yeah.
Okay, where?
Let's see, line 41, page 2.
Okay, I've got it right here. Are those organizations listed in this HJR?
No, they're not, but they should probably be consulted. No cross-sex hormones or puberty-blocking drugs shall be knowingly prescribed or administered for the purpose of gender transition to children under 18 years of age. It goes on. So I have a few questions about that. Again, like this is saying that you know better than pretty much every medical association in the country, if not the world.
Oh, I've never said that I know better than any of those organizations whatsoever.
Well, this would go against what they say specifically.
I think this legislation would go to the voters, and the voters can make an informed decision. The legislation's very clear. I saw you read some of it, starting with line 41.
Mhm.
There's no ambiguity in this legislation. It's very precise.
Okay, I think there is ambiguity. So no gender transition surgery is no longer performed on children under 18 years of age. Are you aware of that ever happening in Missouri?
That transition surgeries has happened on children under the age of 18?
In Missouri.
Well, I think it shouldn't happen. I think the
I'm
kids
not
should be
debating
able to
that.
grow.
I'm asking if you're aware of it ever happening.
No, again, that's not something
I'm not
that
either.
I
I don't
looked
think
at.
it's ever happened in Missouri,
Yeah.
to my knowledge.
Okay.
So this also, even though the American Medical Association and all those other associations approve of gender-affirming care, hormonal treatment, puberty blockers, things like that, to affirm gender of people under 18 years of age who have hit puberty, so you think that you should be able to make medical decisions for other people's children?
No, I think this HJR will go to the voters, and we'll see what the will of the voter is, and I think the voter will agree that those children under the age of 18 ought to be allowed to grow, ought to be allowed to mature, and then have the cognitive ability to make decisions for themselves when they are adults.
So then you would be against parents who don't vaccinate their children?
That's not an opinion that I have, no.
So why do you get to make some medical decisions for other parents?
I think this goes to the will of the voters, and I think children need to be protected. I think both of us would agree that children need to be protected.
I know we both agree on that. I think this actively harms children. I have had 2 trans girls that I know of in my district commit suicide since I've been in session here. I need that to stop happening, and I need these bills to stop happening to do that. This goes specifically against the American Medical Association. I would ask you, can you define sex for me?
Define sex?
Yeah, it's used in here, so I think you should be able to define it.
Yeah, I think under the definitions, we did a great job defining terms that, again, Amendment 3 made very open-ended. Do I have a definition, a personal definition of sex? I think I'll keep that between my wife and myself. How about that?
Well, this affects a lot of people, so maybe you should tell us what your personal definition of sex is, since it's used specifically in this bill.
Sure. I think this legislation protects women and children.
What's that? Sorry, I didn't hear
I think this definition or this legislation protects women and children. I'm not here to define terms outside of what's defined
the
in the
following
legislation.
terms mean, it specifically defines several terms, so let's figure out what those definitions
Let's
are.
look at fetal anomaly if you'd like. It's right there.
No, is my inquiry. Let's look at cross-sex hormones.
Sure.
Testosterone, estrogen, or other androgens given to an individual in amounts that are greater or more potent than would normally occur naturally in a healthy individual of the same age and sex. So define sex for me.
Again, I'll keep that between my wife and myself. I think it's a very
note
private
that
thing,
you-
and I'm sure you would agree.
Sex in this term, you realize is about gender, anatomy, biology, right?
Sure, absolutely.
So this is not about, intercourse is about sex as defined in gender. So why can't you define it?
Pardon, ask that question again?
Why can't you define sex in this bill?
I don't think it's my opportunity here to define sex. I'm presenting a bill that protects
All right,
women
well, then
and
it's very
protects
hard
children.
to define cross-sex hormones.
I think we're outside of the scope of the legislation.
Are you familiar with Klinefelter syndrome?
Pardon?
Klinefelter syndrome?
No, I'm not.
All right, and it's when person assigned male at birth has an extra copy of the X chromosome, but develops as male. Or are you familiar with the Swyer syndrome, I'm sorry.
No, I'm not.
It's when people are born with XY chromosomes but develop as female. These anomalies happen all the time, things like that. So how many nanograms per deciliter do you think counts as an amount more potent than would normally occur
You're
naturally?
asking me what per deciliter? Is that what you're asking?
Nanograms per deciliter is what estrogen and testosterone are measured in.
Well, I think if we have a physician in the room, they might be able to define that.
I think
or
they'd be very
healthcare
mad about this
professional.
bill. All right. Well, maybe we should. Do you know what amount is normal of estrogen or testosterone in 10-year-olds?
No, I'm not a doctor.
Okay, well, just so you know, 7 to 10-year-olds, typically females often have more testosterone than boys of the same age. And also more potent than would normally occur naturally in healthy individuals of the same age and sex. Does this mean women who have gone through menopause cannot receive hormonal treatments?
I think, again, this is beyond the scope, the inquiries beyond the scope of this legislation. I'd recommend that we keep it, as you started off with, very appropriate.
All right.
Keep
Thank
it
you,
within
Representative.
the bill.
If you're not going to answer my questions, I would like to speak on the bill. Thank you. How much time do I have, Mr. Speaker?
5 minutes and 4 seconds.
5 minutes. All right. Try and make it quick. I want to read part of a witness appearance form submitted in testimony the other day. I do believe that what happened in that committee, I was there, was a violation of rules. I think Rule 27, as people deserve a reasonable opportunity to speak on any legislation, and they were not given that. It does say at the discretion of the chair, time may be limited. It doesn't say speech may be limited, and they were told what they're allowed to say, not how long they're allowed to speak. So real quickly, I want to say for Amy Lotta, who was not allowed to speak that night, my name is Amy Lotta. I'm submitting this testimony in strong opposition. People made our voices heard through the democratic process. We voted to enshrine reproductive freedom. Freedom in our state. Constitution Amendment 3 passed because Missourians across party line believe decisions about pregnancy, medical care, and bodily autonomy should be made by individuals, not politicians. And I'm going to go on. Just indulge me here for a second and read this. It's from the Declaration of Independence, which I'm sure we're all familiar with. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain alienable rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. To secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it's the right of the people to alter or abolish it, to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form that they shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. I'm going to skip ahead, but when a long train of abuses and usurpations pursuing invariably the same object evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, their duty to throw off such government, provide new guards for security. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. He is used as assent to laws most wholesome and necessary for the public good. He has forbidden his governors to pass laws of immediate and pressing importance unless suspended in their operation till his assent should be obtained. And when so suspended, has utterly neglected to attend to them. He has refused to pass other laws for the accommodations of large districts of people, unless those people would relinquish their right of representation in the legislature, a right inestimable to them and formidable to tyrants only. With that, Mr. Speaker, may I inquire of the representative from District 95?
That person is not present.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll continue. He has excited domestic insurrections amongst us, and he has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers. It is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. In every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. A prince whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant is unfit to be the ruler of the free people. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from St. Louis County.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To speak on the bill.
Proceed, gentlemen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Finally, the truth comes out. Right? I keep hearing the will of the people is being subverted. And yet, this HJR simply seeks to take something back to the will of the people, to let them have their say. My suspicion is that the other side of the aisle is afraid that the truth will finally come out. And when the people have a second chance at Amendment 3, that they will, in fact, change how they voted. And I can prove it. What did this body just listen to? We listened to gender-affirming care. But remember, the campaign for Amendment 3, every single person that said the broad and overly vague language of Amendment 3 would in fact include gender-affirming care, we were called liars, and we were called fearmongers. We were told that there was nothing in Amendment 3 that spoke about gender-affirming care, and yet we knew better. And 2 weeks after Amendment 3 passes, what did we see? The main groups fighting for Amendment 3, Abortion Action Missouri, gender-affirming care is reproductive health care. Trans and gender expansive people get and need abortions. The National Women's Law Center, reproductive rights include bodily autonomy for trans and intersex youth. You see, that was the truth. That was the truth then, and that is the truth now. The people of Missouri did not vote in Amendment 3 to allow children with a diagnosed mental disorder, children to mutilate, castrate themselves, to permanently alter their bodies so that they cannot have children. A grave horror. It's why we have those children wait until they're adults to make such life-altering decisions. Decisions that there is no recourse from. You heard about puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones. Let's talk about that. It's not just some vague term. One of them is Lupron, not approved by the FDA for gender-affirming care. Do you know why? Because it's a prostate cancer drug. These drugs hurt children. I've spoken to these children who have detransitioned. Somebody very close to me detransitioned. Thank God she didn't have a surgery which would have prevented her from ever having her own children. This is what it's all about. This HJR protects women and children. The people of Missouri did not vote to let children do this to themselves. They deserve a second chance, and we should give it to them. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Further discussion. Gentleman from St. Louis, District 92.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To speak on the bill.
Proceed, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the gentleman from the Sites District, a friend of mine, no, you don't understand the will of the voters. You also said today, quote, the people, not us, the people to decide. We did that. That's what we literally did. They decided. Why is that so difficult to understand? You want to overturn the will of the people because you didn't like the result? In recent history, it appears that your party doesn't care about the will of the people when you lose. That's un-American. And it's terrifying. I'd like to read some of the witness testimony. It's from Sarah Davidson. Voters made their wishes known, myself included, to keep abortion access available to the women of Missouri, and this bill violates our constitutional right to decide by voting. Abortion is health care, and religious definitions of when life begins has no authority in a government that is supposed to keep separate church and state. Women who are opposed to abortion can simply not have one, but the harm caused to women who need the care, goes beyond what lawmakers can even fathom. Samantha Lynn Ladd, I was one of the many, many Missouri voters who felt that it was important to protect a woman's ability to access the medical care that she feels is best for her. We petitioned for that and then voted for a constitutional amendment to protect these rights. This is not an issue about partisan politics. This is about health and the welfare of the women who live here, your sisters, mothers, daughters, nieces, aunts, and neighbors. Keep women safe and stop trying to undermine the will of the people on this issue. Kristen Palmer, it is very clear by the number of voters over and over that the majority of voters believe making abortion rights available in Missouri, women should have control over their bodies. This is definitely government overreach, meddling, and personal decisions. I understand that some people have religious beliefs that prohibit them from approving of abortion. However, some of us do not believe that. And in this country, we have the freedom of religion, and prohibiting abortion is against government interfering in our inherent individual liberty and freedom. Dana Albright, citizens passed reproductive health care rights and a free and fair election. Overturning this goes against everything you say you stand for as a representative of a democratic government. Angela Pointer, the people of Missouri voters to enact Amendment 3 in support of women's reproductive health in Missouri of November 2024, we knew what we were voting for despite elected officials trying to claim we didn't understand. Everyone capable of pregnancy deserves to seek reproductive health care in any form. This is not something for which we need government control. The people of Missouri told you in November what we wanted. Your job as our elected body is to enact what we told you we want. The Missouri Democrats will continue to fight for the will of the people. I invite you and my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to join us and vote no. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Further discussion. Lady from Jefferson County.
Good afternoon, Mr. Speaker. To speak on the bill.
Proceed, lady.
Mr. Speaker, I would like it to be known that on February 14th of 2025, Jackson County Judge Jerry J. Zhang, 8 weeks after she had ruled that Missouri's health and safety regulations protecting women who are having an abortion did not violate Amendment 3, reversed her position and ruled that Missouri's abortion health and safety regulations were now unconstitutional under Amendment 3. I stand in support of this bill. This chamber has heard my personal testimony before, and I've spoken about being a pregnant mother in crisis. I have testified before about how our laws and interpretation of ill-defined, overbroad laws harmed me and many other women across this state. This body voted unanimously to protect women in HB 243 and asked that the body unanimously vote again to protect women today. HJR 73 protects women by returning their legal right to seek restitution in case of malpractice. It protects women by ensuring cleanliness standards in abortion facilities. It offers legal protection for women in medical emergencies and ensures they receive care. I was that pregnant woman in crisis who had the law against her. I came to Jefferson City to stand up for the protection of women. I will never stop fighting for the health and safety of women and for a culture of life in Missouri. In closing, I want to say that HJR 73 will reinstate necessary protections for women and ensure access to health care in cases of miscarriage, ectopic pregnancies, and other medical emergencies. I once again stand in favor of House Joint Resolution 73. Thank you.
Further discussion. Lady from Jackson County.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To inquire of the bill sponsor.
Does the gentleman from Taney yield to the lady from Jackson?
I do.
Proceed.
Good morning, gentlemen.
Good afternoon, lady.
One of the things that I appreciate about you is that you consistently stand up for victims of child sexual abuse, which is something that you know is near and dear to my heart. I worked in a rape crisis center and a domestic violence center when I was in college, in undergrad, and then moved to Kansas City and started working for the Jackson County Children's Division, where I worked for many years. And saw and heard things that I will never repeat. You filed many bills, and I stand in support of them. I filed them too. To extend the statute of limitations for victims of sexual assault. And so I know you know, because of your work on Kanakuk and your work on this issue, that a lot of times survivors of rape and sexual assault don't disclose for a very long time. So what makes you think that they would disclose during the timeline that you're giving them in this bill? Because, sir, conception starts at 2 weeks. You're already pregnant, technically, 2 weeks at conception because of the way the ovulation is measured. Did you know that?
I appreciate that.
Yeah. So when you're trying to get pregnant, and I know this because I've had 3 pregnancies, 2 successful, and all 3 were planned. You generally don't find out you're pregnant until 5, 6, 7 weeks. And that's if you're looking for it. So if you are a newly pubescent child, and my God, we know that the puberty is hitting them earlier every year, can you foresee of a time that you wouldn't know you were pregnant until you were way past that 12-week mark?
I'm not a woman, but I assume
Yeah, I know that.
you may be correct.
Yeah. Would it surprise you to learn that there are children in this state that are raped by their parents? Those very parents that you would have be the ones that give them permission to terminate that pregnancy.
I think that would be, rape is a horrific act. And
Yeah.
the people that were involved in that should be punished to the fullest extent of the law.
I don't disagree.
But it's not the infant in the womb's
Yeah, that's
fault.
not my question. Because of legislation passed by this body, we don't have sex education in our public schools. There are children in this state who get raped and impregnated and can't tell you how babies are made, let alone that they are pregnant. There are people in this body who can't tell you how babies are made that are going to vote on this bill. And there are men in this body who have tried to explain it to me, a mother, about how pregnancy works. It's rich. So, I've heard a lot about how this bill is about protecting women, protecting children, which is not only pedantic and condescending, it's incredibly paternalistic because it says that you know what's best for me and my body, and you know what's best for every person with a uterus in this state. Okay. Well, I remember, gentlemen, a couple years ago when you tried to pass a bill in a committee of mine that would ban access to medication to treat ectopic pregnancies.
No, I think
I'm glad that you've learned.
Yeah, that was a false interpretation of that bill.
I don't know. The Today Show said different.
We have the recording.
So I want to go back to, you know, I appreciate the women on your side of the aisle having so much faith in the women of this state to have pregnancies against their will.
Representative,
and I appreciate
are you
that,
advocating for
no, sir,
abortion
this is my inquiry, and I'm going to speak.
The time of fetal viability?
Did you hear me say that? Is that what I said?
I'm asking that question.
Is this your inquiry or is it mine, sir?
No, I think it's yours at this time.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
So I've heard some talk about domestic violence, and yeah, statistically, the most dangerous time in a woman's life is when she is pregnant. I almost died in childbirth with my second child. And that is the reason I do not have a third, which was my full intent. The maternal mortality rates of this state are abysmal, and we'll hear other people speak on that later, I'm sure. We hear time and time again that you guys care about the life of the mother. You care about the life of the mother, okay. So I heard you guys talk about mental health and how it was so vague in Amendment 3, yet you bandy that term about when it comes to firearms and everything else. So I'm going to tell you about mental health and pregnancy. Are you aware what happens to the hormones in a woman's body when she's pregnant?
I think I've seen that by observation. Yes, I am married and we do have 3 children, and I am a grandfather.
Cool. So do you know that most antipsychotic medications are contraindicated during pregnancy?
No, I'm not a physician.
Yeah, I know. You just make laws for them. So, do you believe abortion is murder?
Absolutely.
Okay. But only after 12 weeks?
No.
Okay. So you think it's murder the whole time?
Absolutely.
Okay. Even in cases of rape or incest?
I think we're presenting House Joint Resolution 73,
Yeah,
which would align itself with the will of the voter who voted for Amendment 3.
Sure.
I think they'll vote for this bill too.
Do you?
Absolutely.
And if it fails, what will you do next?
If it fails, we'll continue to protect the life of women in the state of Missouri.
Oh, no. Against their will, right?
Protecting women against their will?
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
It's my desire to protect women through this legislation, children and the unborn, and to present to the voters exactly what they voted for.
Gentlemen, I am not saying you don't care. I'm not saying that you don't have the best intent. I'm saying you're not listening. You are not listening, and you are often a really good listener when it comes to survivors and folks that we've worked together, and I don't know why this is such a blank space for you. Such a blind spot. Can you tell me when the trans language was added? Because I wonder how bad the polling was on the rest of this before you guys decided to add that.
No, I can't say specifically when this language was added.
Yeah.
I think it's been part and parcel of the bill as far as I can recall.
Okay.
Protecting children. It's
Did
important.
So you didn't write this legislation?
Did I write? No, I did not write this legislation. No, I think
who
this
gave
has
this
been
legislation
well
to
vetted.
you?
I saw the Senate version of this legislation, and this mirrors it to an extent. There are some subtle changes to the Senate's legislation.
Oh, okay. And so you were just asked to be the bill sponsor?
Yes.
Okay. That makes sense. Okay. So you weren't here in 2019.
No.
Very few of the people in the body were. I was. It was my first year. And I remember the original version of House Bill 126 had exceptions for rape or incest. Did you know that?
No, I did not. I was not here then.
Yeah.
Right.
And folks on the floor in this body said, well, that's still murder, so we're not down with that. So they took it out. But most of the Republicans in the House were told it would be added back in after it went through the Senate. And those of you who were here in 2019 know that I'm telling the truth. And you can go back and look if you don't believe me. So what I found really interesting about that was after the bill passed without the exceptions for rape or incest, I had talks with lots of Republicans, and they said, it's okay. It's okay, Keri, because Roe isn't going to be overturned. Did you know that most of your former colleagues didn't think Roe was going to be overturned? So they didn't think that this was going to be the problem that happened. But it was. And so while I appreciate you putting these exceptions in, So generous. I have to wonder, before Amendment 3 passed, how many pieces of legislation do you think were filed to put exceptions in for rape or incest between 2019 and 2023?
No,
or even
I don't.
2024?
Yeah, I don't know.
Would it surprise you that Republicans filed 0 pieces of legislation to add exceptions during that time period? But now you're being so generous to the women and the children of the state. And I thank you for that, gentlemen. Mr. Speaker, to speak on the bill.
Proceed.
Since the heartbeat bill was passed in 2019, at that time the most restrictive abortion bill in the country, and you all were so proud of it, so proud. And then Roe fell, and our Attorney General could not wait to hit that trigger ban and make it the most restrictive law in the land. You guys are falling all over yourselves. There wasn't one person that filed a piece of legislation on your side of the aisle to put exceptions in. Not one. And you know now that this is the only way to get the control back. But here's the deal. These aren't the only abortion bills that we've heard since 2019. Even when you guys had, by your own words, by the words of your leadership, the most restrictive abortion laws in the whole country, it wasn't enough. You tried to ban treatment for ectopic pregnancies, including the sponsor of this bill. Go ahead and Google that. Google it. You can watch the committee hearing yourself. Born Alive Abortion Survivors Act, year after year after year. Trying to restrict access to birth control, calling it an abortifacient. Heard that a couple times. I have no doubt that if and when this HJR goes in front of the people, if it were to pass, it would just be the beginning. You all would fall over yourselves to be the ones that were the next to file legislation to keep women from being able to control their bodies and their lives. This from the same people that viewed wearing a mask and getting a shot as government tyranny. Well, tell me if it isn't government tyranny if I can't control the organs in my body. Not yours. What agency and control do we have if we cannot control our own bodies? For those of you who keep saying, well, my district didn't vote for it, my district didn't vote for it, my district didn't vote for it, that's not how elections work. Guess what? No Republicans won my district. No statewides. But I don't get to say that it's President Harris in House District 35. But I will tell you this. In Senate District 8, it passed by 58.3%. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Further discussion, lady from St. Louis City.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To speak on the bill.
Proceed, lady.
Excuse my voice, Mr. Speaker.
Excuse me, lady, I apologize.
I said, excuse my voice, Mr. Speaker.
Proceed, lady.
Mr. Speaker, I stand before you today to speak truth. A truth that has been buried, ignored, and rewritten for too long. Black women are dying because of a system that was never built to protect us. HJR 73 threatens to ban abortion in nearly all cases, hiding behind language about safety and ethics. But let's be honest, this isn't about safety. This is about control. This is about politicians inserting themselves into private medical decisions and playing politics with our bodies. And it will be, once again, Black women who pay the highest price. Black maternal mortality is not a new crisis. It is a symptom, however, of something deeper. Systemic racism baked into the foundations of our medical system. Black women in Missouri are 3 to 4 times more likely to die from pregnancy-related causes than white women. Nationally, this gap persists, even when we're controlling the income and the outcomes of education. Why? Because this isn't about personal choice. This is about the system we are forced to navigate. Systems that devalue Black life and dismiss Black pain. We cannot talk about maternal health without talking about history. We are missing the contributions of Black women to modern medicine at the expense of our bodies. From Lucy and Betsy and Anarcha, enslaved women who were experimented on without consent. Henrietta Lacks, whose cells were stolen, to the generations of Black midwives and healers who were pushed out by white medical establishment that saw them as a threat, not a resource. Black doulas and midwives were once central to maternal care in this country. They brought knowledge, compassion, and cultural grounded practices that kept mothers and babies safe. But as the medical field professionalized, or more accurately, colonized, those Black practitioners were systemically excluded, criminalized, and erased. Hospitals were replaced home births. Licensures laws made it harder for Black women to practice, and suddenly a system rooted in wisdom was no longer. Today, we are living with the consequences of this erasure. Black women often receive substandard care. Our symptoms are ignored. Our pain is untreated. Our concerns are brushed to the side, and now lawmakers want to take away the right to abortion, a right that is essential not just for our bodily autonomy, but for our survival. Let's be clear. You cannot claim to care about maternal health while restricting reproductive freedom. You cannot claim to protect women while criminalizing their choices. And you certainly cannot ignore the role of systemic racism in redlining that isolates Black families in care deserts, in wage gaps that make pretermal and prenatal care unaffordable, in Medicaid policies that end coverage too soon, and its hospitals that are too far, too few, and too hostile. Mr. Speaker, this is a call to action. This is for everybody out there that's a voter. We must fight for a world where Black women are trusted, supported, and free. That means restoring these accesses, not what this bill says of reproductive health care. The title should be anti-reproductive health care. This means investing in Black communities. This means rewriting the rules of a system that was failed and has failed us for generations. Because reproductive justice is more than the right to have a child. It is also about the right not to have a child, but also to raise them in safe communities and live long enough to see them grow up. We need to reject this. Because if we accept this, we ignore not only the history, but we ignore every black woman that's in this building. Black women's health is no longer an afterthought. Mr. Speaker, I wrote this down when I had my heels on, and I got tired of standing up in them. Mr. Speaker, I'm trying to remain civil, but this bill is not a civil bill. When are we, and let me take me out of it, when are y'all gonna stop raping Missourians? They consistently tell you no, stop, I don't want it. And you force yourself on them again and again and again. Mr. Speaker, I put on all my Vaseline today because I was ready to squabble. This is a fight. And Mr. Speaker, just like Goliath, you will go down. Thank you.
Gentleman from St. Louis County, District 82.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To speak on the resolution.
Proceed, gentlemen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There are two very, well, I want to, as it relates to the bill, let me speak about freedom, if I may, Mr. Speaker. There are two different, clearly different visions of what freedom means in this chamber. I know from my side of the aisle, we believe that true freedom gives each of us the opportunity and the freedom to make decisions about our own lives. But the thing about freedom, Mr. Speaker, is that freedom requires other people to be free to make decisions about their own lives too. On the other side, I never understood their engagement with the word freedom, because how can you know freedom if your people have never been in chains? I never understood their obsession with the word freedom. But, Mr. Speaker, there really are good people acting in good faith on the other side of this issue. And I respect anyone whose faith leads them in the direction to oppose abortion. But if we truly believe in freedom, I would encourage my friends across the aisle to respect everyone's freedom on a deeply personal issue like the decision whether or not to obtain reproductive health care. And I really just leave it at, you know, the decision for a woman to access reproductive health care is something that should be left between a woman and her doctor. Government has no right to be in a doctor's office. Freedom doesn't mean I'm free to tell you when, how, and what your family looks like. Freedom is giving people the opportunity to make decisions about their own body. So in the name of freedom, I would ask my colleagues to vote this bill down and return us a bill that actually addresses the issues of reproductive health care, like increasing access to reproductive health care and investing in projects that give women support in their doctor's offices, not restrict their freedom. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from Jefferson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To speak on the resolution.
Proceed, gentlemen.
And I appreciate some latitude as I explain my position on this issue. I've heard a lot of talk that this is overturning the will of the people, when in fact we want to give it back to the people and let the people decide. Amendment 3 was grossly misrepresented, and I heard testimony of that. When they were gathering signatures, people from out of our state, you were okay with putting it on the ballot when out-of-state money and out-of-state people put it on there. And so I do think that the voters deserve a do-over, because it is my belief that abortion is killing a defenseless human child in the mother's womb. The mother's womb. The mother's womb should be the safest place in this universe, but sadly, too often it is not. Now, I'm not a fanatic, but I am a born-again Christian. And on tough issues, I always try to seek the biblical view, because I want to seek God's will while I'm here. And so I'm asking if all my colleagues would just today listen for God's voice. In the book of Jeremiah, God said, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you." In the book of Proverbs, King Solomon tells us among the things that God hates are hands that shed innocent blood. And in Matthew, Jesus said, "Suffer the little children and forbid them not to come unto me, because of such is the kingdom of heaven." I had a woman in my office just this morning. I'm just off for a second. Her name was Sue. She told me how about a dozen years or so ago, her future daughter-in-law was raped. Her family advised her to get an abortion. She chose not to. Sue's son married her anyway, adopted the baby, and she showed me pictures on her phone of her beautiful 11-year-old granddaughter. So in closing, Mr. Speaker, millions of dollars of out-of-state money and massive assault in the media and vague, ambiguous ballot language helped the media push Amendment 3 across the line. It didn't pass by much. It didn't pass in my county, and it failed miserably in my district. And it's my belief that if we give the voters another choice, they will take it. Thank you.
For the discussion, lady from St. Louis, District 74.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I stand not just as a legislator, but as someone who experienced the weight of a deeply personal and complex reproductive health decision. I didn't make that choice lightly, and I didn't need the government making it for me. I needed care, compassion, and autonomy, not political interference. HJR 73 is not a public health measure. It's a political document dressed up as one. It imposes government control over deeply personal medical decisions under the guise of safety and ethics. But let's be clear, doctors already follow strict medical standards. Adding layers of legislation interferes, only delays care and puts lives at risk. The amendments creates new barriers for patients, especially in rural and underserved areas, and opens the door to dangerous confusion around miscarriage care, atomic pregnancies, treatments, and other emergencies. It doesn't improve health outcomes, it undermines them. If we truly care about families and public health, we should be investing in maternal care, comprehensive sex education, access to contraceptive, and support for parents and children, not passing a constitutional amendment that criminalizes care and threatens medical judgment. If the body chooses to move forward with HJR 73, then I have no choice but to challenge the voters directly. We have got to stop lying to our voters. We have got to trust them. We go around with these petitions, we knock on doors, well, some of us knock on doors. We tell them what we're gonna do for them. They believe us, we believe, we're counting in our head how many votes we have in these households. You know from your piece of paper, from your voter's registration, you know that you have 5, 6, 7 votes out of that house. So to repeal what they have already voted on is wrong. If you ignore the voice of our constituents, then we must remind them where the real power lies. Our voters are not incompetent. They know what they voted for. You know what you told them. You know what you promised them. Give them back what they deserve. Please vote no against HJR 73. Thank you.
Gentleman from Clay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To speak on the bill from a microphone, not my own, please.
Proceed, gentlemen.
Thank you. So, this one is louder than the one I'm used to. Apologies. We've heard a lot of discussion today about Amendment 3 and some of the perceived challenges with it, and I think there's been a lot of misinformation that I just want to really briefly correct. One of the biggest talking points that we're hearing is that Amendment 3 is a disaster for safety, and there are no provisions that account for the safety of women. And that's simply not true, because right out of the text of Amendment 3, it says that the government can have a compelling interest in regulating reproductive health care as long as the effect is improving or maintaining the health of the person seeking care, is consistent with widely accepted clinical standards of practice and evidence-based medicine, and does not infringe on that person's autonomous decision-making. And it is not the purpose of the Constitution to line out regulation specifically of medical practice. As the gentleman from the Clemens district made the point earlier, this is written like a statute. And a lot of folks on the other side of the aisle tend to complain when things too big and too wordy and too specific get put into the Constitution, but we seem to be fine with it here. Amendment 3 does and did protect women. It does protect women and children. I also want to address what we keep hearing in that folks didn't know what they were voting for. And I can't say how many times some of us on this side have said that's insulting, to think that voters are so ill-informed that they don't understand what's at stake. And the lady from St. Louis County said it very well when she said to many of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle that they also voted for you. So where were they wrong? But I wanted to read the ballot title of Amendment 3 because the bill sponsor has made the claim that a lot of folks went to the ballot thinking that they were voting only on exceptions. And I don't see how you get that from a ballot title that says, do you want to amend the Missouri Constitution to establish a right to make decisions about reproductive health care, including abortion and contraceptions, with any governmental interference of that right presumed invalid? Do you want to remove Missouri's ban on abortion? Do you want to allow regulation of reproductive health care to improve or maintain the health of the patient, and so on? So to make the assumption that people went to the ballot and did not understand that they were overturning fully the most restrictive abortion ban in the country is offensive to voters. It truly is. People knew what they were voting for when they voted on Amendment 3. They knew that you all in this body had gone too far. They knew that you had put undue restrictions on women and you had put their lives at risk with a total ban. They knew it, they didn't like it, and they voted to overturn it. Now, we are here saying, well, we're going to give them another chance for reasons. But I know a lot of folks in this body had problems with Amendment 2, sports betting. It passed by an even slimmer margin. Where are all the bills that were filed and heard to overturn Amendment 2 if we think the folks there didn't understand what they were voting on? Where are any of the bills that were filed to overturn Amendment 7, which passed out of this body and went to the ballot? Because if we're trying to overturn all the amendments because people don't know what they're voting on, why don't we give them all a shot? The fact is, this is not about the people not understanding what they're voting on. It's about this body disagreeing with what they voted on and continuing to do everything that they can to overturn it. And we know, Mr. Speaker, that if this HJR gets onto the ballot, if it fails, which I believe it will, Well, we're not going to put that issue to rest. We're not going to say, oh, the people had another bite. They decided, let's get on with our lives. No, we'll cook up some new thing next time. And if that one fails, we'll cook up something else, and we'll keep tweaking, and we'll keep being disingenuous. We'll keep coming up with worse and worse and more deceptive language until we get a win, and then suddenly we won't be concerned with the issue anymore, and we'll probably restrict the process even further so that we can never pass anything like it again. I'm on my 3rd year in this body, and I have spent the entire time fighting against efforts of the majority to weaken the power of people to pass items by referendum when this body does things wrong. And this is just another example of the really contempt for the people's voices that a lot of folks on the other side of the aisle have. With that, too, several of my colleagues have been sharing testimony from folks who were denied the ability to make their voices heard at the hearing last week, and I found it interesting that the lady from St. Louis County said that she spoke to hundreds of people about Amendment 3, though she didn't seem interested in hearing from the hundreds that showed up last week to testify. So I want to read some testimony from a constituent of mine. Her name is Jada. She's actually in the gallery today. And this is her recounting of what happened on Tuesday and how it made her feel. I drove down to Jefferson City. I had some things prepared to say for testimony, but sadly didn't get to use it in the room. The rule change was only announced in the room, and 2 things that stood out to me were, 1, the chair started the meeting by addressing the crowd and saying that this was round 2 of hearing this HJR, and I thought that was the perfect way for her to show how they understand that they are trying to do something that has already failed. The second thing that stood out to me was that they couldn't even get 5 people to speak in favor. This was really a failure of limiting to 5 people because they couldn't even get 5 of their own to support it while there were hundreds lined up to speak against it. The gentleman from the Jameson district got up and gave me a tissue because I was crying in the front row, and this meant so much to me. I was really upset that there were so many adults around me just blatantly lying about women with no correction. After the hearing in the rotunda, we gathered and had an impromptu meeting where those who didn't get a chance to testify could speak to the crowd. Many Democratic members of the House attended. This moment emotionally saved me from the prior. I was extremely distraught, but this showing of unity really allowed me to leave Jeff City with a different perspective. I am looking forward to keeping with the battle on this. A lot of folks were denied their right to speak and be heard on this because there seemed to be a lack of interest from folks on the other side of the aisle to hear it. And based on the amount of empty chairs on the other side, I have a feeling maybe that is persisting in this body today. I also take offense to the way that folks in the majority who smoke on this sort of sneer when they talk about the will of the people, because we're all here by the will of the people. And that's what this body is about. This is the people's house. We should respect the people's voices. Sending this back to them is not a democratic exercise. It's an attempt to slap them on the wrist, tell them they were wrong, and maybe they can do it better next time, and that's insulting. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Lady from St. Louis County.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To speak on the resolution.
Proceed, lady.
So there's a few things that I want to point out. First of all, I find it interesting that on a resolution that the other side of the body finds to be so important, when I look over, half of the people are not even here to listen or take part in the conversation. So to say that you're open-minded and willing to discuss and all the things that we hear, you're not even here. And second of all, I keep hearing that this is to protect women. Here's the thing. I don't want your protection. I don't need your protection. I'm good. So that argument is really, really lost on me. I've also heard about how skewed and bad the ads were and the advertising was for Amendment 3, but I'm going to tell you, nothing was more deceptive than the ads on the other side that were on TV that showed these nasty, horrible images that some TV stations would not even show because they were so bad. So don't use that as an argument. And in terms of percentages, I represent St. Louis County, as does one of the ladies who heard this bill. It passed in St. Louis County by 67%. It passed in my district by 80%. 80%. Do you know how many emails I've gotten asking me to vote against this? More than I can count. And how many I've gotten to vote for it? Not a single one. In terms of safety, we already have safety. We don't have dental hygienists practicing like this. When you say it's open to medical professionals, all medical professionals have a practice act that they follow. Nowhere in the dental hygienist or any of the other professions you've listed, nowhere in their practice act does it say they can perform abortions. Therefore, they're not doing it. Again, fear-mongering. We also know, when you're talking about safety, that the repercussions of banning abortion cause way more safety issues than having them. We know that people start looking for back alley options when they don't have a legal option. And that's when medical issues arise and people lose their lives. We also know that bodily autonomy is a core principle of our society. Every person has the right to govern their own body and to make decisions that align with their own beliefs and values and circumstances. My choices do not have to align with your beliefs. I have my own beliefs, and like I don't need your protection, I also don't need you to tell me what my beliefs should be. And lastly, I think what we always miss in this discussion is that it's not just about abortion. It's also about access to contraception. It's about sex education, and it's about providing resources for families, which we don't do. Women would probably be less likely to look for abortion as an option if they thought they were going to have support to care for the baby they are carrying. But as a state, that is not our priority. Again, we'd rather talk about guns and slot machines than helping women in this state. So I ask that you stop trying to protect me or my constituents, because we can protect ourselves. And I ask that you listen to the will of the people in St. Louis County, which is the largest county in the state that overwhelmingly passed this. My district, which has the highest percentage of voting in St. Louis County, passed it by 80%. We should not be just ignoring this and claiming people didn't know what they were voting for, because I promise you, if you come to my district, I would be happy to set you up with meetings for people to explain that they knew exactly what they were voting for. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Further discussion, lady from Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To speak on the bill.
Proceed, lady.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I would like to speak in favor of HJR 73 for a few particular reasons. For the safety of women and children, because of the ambiguity and the unintended consequences of the passage of Amendment 3. So a few of those issues include safety, as I just mentioned. So Jackson County County Judge Jerry Zhang actually reversed their opinion and stated that Missouri's abortion health and safety regulations were now unconstitutional under Amendment 3. This means that anyone that's a healthcare professional other than a doctor can perform abortion because of the ambiguity of the language. That there are no emergency procedures for situations that happen. There are no procedures and regulations for the cleanliness and sterilization of these rooms, just like there would be in any other facility. That is a very big concern for safety for me. Another issue is the right of women can no longer pursue legal recourse should something happen to them, or the folks around them could not sue their family members should something severely, just horrific happen to a woman who had a botched abortion. Minors able to have perform abortions or surgical procedures without their parental knowledge or consent. And then lastly, about the mental stress of minors and because of the consequences of having some surgical procedures or abortions. And on a personal note, I would like to tell a little story about a friend of mine. Years and years and years ago, she became pregnant, and with the consent of her mother, she did have abortion, and she was 16 years old. After the birth of her first child, she realized what she had done, and every year on the anniversary of that date, she calls me and she cries and she cries. And the stress that she's had, she will never forgive herself for that. So there are just so many reasons that this needs to be taken back to the voters for them to have another choice. That's what I am asking this body to do, is to let the voters have another choice. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from Clay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To speak on the bill and then to ask or inquire of the bill sponsor.
Proceed, gentlemen.
Thank you. I want to lift up the words of Sarah Watkins Farrell from Cape Girardeau, who was not able to share these the other night during the hearing. Quote, "To the honorable members of the Missouri General Assembly, my name is Sarah Watkins Farrell, and I am a 43-year-old woman, a mother of 2 living daughters and 1 daughter who passed away shortly after birth due to a premature delivery at 20 weeks. I am writing today in strong opposition to HJR 73. When I was 22 years old, I experienced a high-risk pregnancy that nearly took my life. After miscarrying 1 twin early in the pregnancy, I was diagnosed with placenta previa and endured constant bleeding. I was told by my doctors that if I began to hemorrhage, I could bleed to death before help could reach me, even in the hospital setting. My OBGYN had to sit by my husband and me and ask us to make an impossible decision. Should it come down to saving my life or the baby's? What would our directive be? We were forced to consider not only my survival, but also the condition of our unborn child, who was not developing normally, would have faced a life of suffering. We were lucky, if you can call it that the decision was made for us. My daughter was born too early to survive and passed away in our arms within hours. But I lived. And I went on to have 2 more daughters, each pregnancy complicated and high risk, but always mine to face and mine to navigate, supported by my doctor, my family, and my faith. HJR 73 would rob Missouri women of that same constitutional protection, the right to make deeply personal and often tragic decisions within their doctors, not politicians. I cannot not imagine watching my own daughters go through what I went through and being told the state knows better than they do. 3% of the pregnancies are associated with major congenital malformations or a lethal genetic disease. The terrible fact is that a number of non-viable babies are a part of families' lives. I'd like to inquire of the bill sponsor to talk about a particular situation, if you'd be so inclined to indulge me.
Does the gentleman from Taney yield?
I do.
You may proceed.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
This is a very complex issue. It's taken a long time, and I appreciate the energy and the emotion that's a part of all this. and the sincerity by which all people have talked about this. The question is, if a family was expecting a child and it's the 22nd week, up until through the first trimester, everything seemed to be okay. But at the 22nd week, they find out that the child is not going to survive outside of the womb. And they have to face a decision whether or not to abort that child to save the mother's life, because the OBGYN at that point is saying, I can't guarantee you're going to survive the birth of this child if you do take it to term. The question is, does this bill accommodate for that, or how does it accommodate for that?
Yes, I would suggest absolutely. We'll look at page 1, lines 6 and 7. It states, an abortion may be performed or induced upon a woman in cases of medical emergency and or fetal anomaly. So I think it's very important to protect the life of the mother in the instances that you just mentioned.
So the fetal anomaly covers a whole lot of issues then. Is that how this bill works?
Yeah, I think we're looking at the definition. Again, this is very narrowly tailored. The definition of fetal anomaly is on page 3, lines 61 and 62. Fetal anomaly, a structural or functional abnormality in the unborn child's gestational development that would make life outside the womb impossible. And I think, once again, via that definition, we can protect women who may have medical emergencies.
So the question is, are medical doctors understanding it with that clarity? Do they know that if they are in a situation like I described, that I can make a decision that this child should be aborted, and that would be an appropriate action in the state of Missouri?
I think the doctor should be allowed and be involved in the discussion with the patient, yes.
Is it possible to put specific statements like that or examples like that in the bill, as opposed to the general comment of medical emergencies and anomalies?
I think what we're presenting to the people is something, once again, that's been well vetted, and it does state in the summary statement that they'll be voting on to ensure women's safety during abortions and allow, and this is going to a vote of the people. I think we've stressed that over and over again. This is for the people to decide, not the legislature, not the governor, not the president. This is for the people of the state of Missouri, and it says to allow abortions for medical emergencies, fetal anomalies, rape, and incest. And I think that clarifies, if there is a medical emergency where the life of the mother is truly involved, that would be something that should be discussed with her physician.
All the way through the pregnancy?
I would suggest yes, in the case of medical emergencies, absolutely.
Thank you for the inquiry. To speak on the bill just for a moment.
Proceed, gentlemen.
I appreciate the response to my question. I still believe that there needs to be more clarity about that issue, because I think one of the things we've talked about today is being clear about these things, and I think that's one particular issue that must be brought out even more clearly with specific examples. And I believe that that is partly the reason why I can't support the bill, but regardless of how things move forward, I think we have to be extremely clear about everything, because we are dealing with human lives, and we all agree that taking care of human lives is a huge part of our responsibility here, and that requires greater clarity in my view. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
For the discussion, gentleman from Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, to speak on the resolution.
Proceed, gentlemen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I spoke recently on the floor about kind of unintended consequences, ripple effects when we think about passing bills when we are too prescriptive. And I'm especially concerned about being so prescriptive about medical practice in our Constitution and giving doctors no leeway to practice outside of how we, as a body, say they should practice medicine. Other folks have covered that, so I am going to move on from that. But I wanted to read some testimony from Amanda, who talks a little bit about these ripple effects, and I think demonstrates that well. Amanda said, "Thank God my family member was able to access the appropriate care she needed in that heart-wrenching August. With her specific disease and the unique health challenges that come with her case, doctors told her it would be almost certainly fatal to her and the baby if she were to continue with her pregnancy. She agonized over the decision, but the risk that her other child would be left without a mother was too much for her. She and her doctors determined the best course of action for her life and that of her living child. We, the people of Missouri, have already spoken about this right, and it passed. It is crucial that lawmakers represent the will of the people and oppose this abortion ban." It's not lost on me that if this resolution passes and it goes to the voters and the voters turn it down, that y'all will come back and just try to do it again. And so what it was kind of come to my mind as we've been listening to this debate, or most of us, is that this isn't about the will of the people for you all at all, Mr. Speaker. At least in my mind. It seems that it's just that you have no idea what else to talk about. That you have no creativity, no innovation, no vision for where our state should be and real solutions that impact people. In fact, our Capitol says downstairs, where there is no vision, the people perish. And I think that's what we're seeing in our state. Our maternal mortality rates are already some of the highest in the nation. Our schools are failing. Our rural hospitals are closing. But here we are spending a Tuesday talking about abortion. It's kind of jamming to the oldies here. We have no idea what else to talk about but abortion. And so I would ask the majority party to infuse a little more creativity into the policies that they are passing, things that are going to actually hurt or help working families back home, people that are already struggling to put food on their table, folks back home who are watching their retirement accounts dwindle week by week in the last few months. People back home that are struggling to drive on 23rd Street or 40 Highway because they are state roads and the state isn't investing in our infrastructure like it should. When I think about the phrase taxation without representation, I think that's exactly what this is. People are sending us here to do a job. We're not doing it. People are telling us what they would like us to do, and we are choosing not to do that. Mr. Speaker, I would hope that moving forward in these next 5 weeks that we would pass some bills that actually help people and don't just make political points over and over and over. Thank you.
Gentleman from St. Louis County from a microphone other than your own.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To inquire of the resolution handler.
Does the gentleman from Taney yield?
Yes, I do.
Proceed.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. We started with good morning, but I've been standing for 2 hours.
Good afternoon.
It's been said by some of the speakers that Amendment 3 grossly misrepresented what it was to the voters. Is that your opinion?
I think Amendment 3 opened a lot of doors to interpretation, and I think HJR 73 solves that problem.
Do you think voters knew what they were voting for when they voted in Amendment 3?
I think the voters had an idea of what they were voting for when they voted, absolutely, or they wouldn't have showed up at the polls.
And I think in your opening statements you mentioned how you were pro-life. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. And you see this HJR as an effort or a resolution that if it was passed, adopted by the voters, it would lead to fewer abortions across the state of Missouri, right?
I would hope so, and the protection of women is paramount in this legislation.
Okay, and you think it would restrict both the number of abortions to minors as well as to people over the age of 18, right?
I think it would allow for parental consent for minors as well as allowing for the rape and incest exclusions.
As compared to now under Amendment 3 and then the future should this resolution become law, do you believe there would be fewer abortions performed on women who are above the age of 18?
It would be my hope, yes.
Okay. I'd like to look at what the voters will be facing. This is at the end of the joint resolution. This will be the language that's actually on the ballot when they go into the box. It says, shall the Missouri Constitution be amended to, and there are 6 bullet points. You can follow along if you'd like.
Yes.
Bullet point 1, guarantee access to care for medical emergencies, ectopic pregnancies, and miscarriages. Does anything in bullet point 1 suggest to a woman who is above the age of 18 that voting for this will restrict her ability to get an abortion in some circumstances?
No, I think it would allow for greater care for women and allow the doctors to actually do what their oath gives them to do. That is to protect and preserve life, and particularly women.
I'm sorry to cut you off a little bit, but there are
That's
other people who want to speak, and it's been over 2 hours already. The second bullet point, ensure women's safety during abortions. Does that tell someone who's voting that fewer adult women will be able to get an abortion if they choose to?
No, I think it's very clear that it ensures women's safety during abortions.
But it has nothing to do with their ability to access an abortion at all, right?
No, again,
Okay.
I'm reading the
Bullet
legislation.
Bullet point 3, ensure parental consent for minors. Again, we're just talking, and this is my inquiry, we're just talking about women over the age of 18. So anything dealing with minors doesn't impact the right of a woman over the age of 18 to get an abortion. Is that right?
It doesn't say that here.
Okay. The fourth bullet point, allow abortions for medical emergencies, fetal abnormalities, rape, and incest. So nothing in that bullet point talks about when abortions are not allowed, right?
Well, I think it does. On page 3, would you like
No. But this is what the voters are going to see.
Would you allow me to respond to the inquiry?
I'm inquiring about what the voters will see when they go into the ballot.
I think you're making a statement rather than an inquiry.
What they're going to see are these 6 bullet points.
Sure.
And we're on bullet point number 5, and there's already no bullet point that tells a voter that there will be fewer abortions allowed for a woman who is at least 18 years old.
I think within the legislation, it provides for a definition of medical emergency. Would you like me to discuss that?
No, because the voter's not going to face that when they're in the ballot box.
They're not
We're
going
talking
to
about
read.
voters who have been confused, to your side's point of view, confused as to Amendment 3. And I'm talking about what the voter will see when they go to the ballot box if we pass this.
I encourage every voter to go to house.mo.gov and look at the House Committee substitute for House Joint Resolution 73. I encourage all voters to vet the legislation that they're voting on and not to walk into the voting booth blindly. I encourage them to read this legislation. I encourage you to read this legislation.
To continue my inquiry, the 5th bullet point, require physicians to provide medically accurate information, does not tell a voter that they will not be able to access an abortion if they would like to access one, right?
Well, it says requires physician to provide medically accurate information.
And that doesn't tell a voter
I think that's important.
I'm not disagreeing that information is
Sure.
important. What I'm
I
saying
think
is
you would be
it
in
doesn't tell a
agreement
voter
with-
they can't get an abortion.
No, it says require
Okay, and the
physicians
last bullet
to
point
provide...
talks about protecting children from gender transition. That doesn't have anything to do with abortion, right?
No, it says protect children from gender transition. I think, again, it's very clear. This is simplified language that any of us, even a non-medical professional, a non-attorney, could actually go into the voting booth and agree with these statements. And the legislation is online. I'll put it on my Facebook post if you want the vast majority of Missourians to read it.
I don't disagree that a non-lawyer could read this and agree with it. That's my problem with it.
That a non-lawyer could read this and agree with it.
Because they
That's
wouldn't
my hope.
understand what's actually being passed, which is a restriction on abortion.
I think they do.
That's the whole point is abortion. And I'm not seeing anything here that says an adult woman can't get an abortion except under certain limited circumstances that the law prescribes.
This legislation is available to every Missouri citizen, and I encourage them to read it.
Mr. Speaker, to speak on the bill.
Proceed.
Mr. Speaker, we started early on and we talked about this being the people's house. People on both sides have testified today to this being the people's house. I didn't want to I want to provide due deference to the chaplain here. 1 Peter, servants, be subject to your masters. If this is the people's house, they are our masters, we are the servants. This erases what they have told us to do. Ephesians, servants, obey your earthly masters for fear and trembling as you would Christ. I didn't even want to bring up the last one, but the gentleman from Jefferson mentioned the Bible when he was speaking about this issue, and I thought we'd bring up Genesis right at the beginning. God breathed into the nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being at that point. I'm not here to debate the Bible, what the Bible tells us to do. I'm not here to debate our faith, but I am here saying that if the reason for this amendment is necessary is because the people were confused by Amendment 3, the language that they are going to see in the ballot has nothing to do with what you are trying to accomplish here. Thank you.
Lady from Green.
To speak on the bill, please.
Proceed, lady.
Mr. Speaker, I have two daughters. 28, 25. We love them more than anything. It was my husband's goal in life to have two daughters. And that happened for us. We were fortunate. Now, my 28-year-old daughter, who lives outside of the state of Missouri, very successful, said, Mom, Dad, I want to move back home. I want to move closer to Missouri. I want to live closer to you and Dad so that you can help us with our hopefully one day children that we will have. And trust me, there is nothing more that I want than to have grandchildren. My husband is chomping at the bit to have grandchildren. I have to tell him to back off. And when our daughter said, we want to move closer to Missouri, I said, you might want to pump the brakes on that. You might want to live over in Kansas where your reproductive rights are protected. Because if God forbid, there was an emergency situation or you needed different medical care, I would want that physician to be able to protect your life and do what is needed to be done without worry of what I or this body might do. So here I am telling my daughter, go live in Kansas, give your tax money to Kansas, because I feel it's safer. November comes along, the voters vote, we restore reproductive rights for women. My daughter can move back to Missouri. My daughter can move back to Missouri because I feel she will be safe and can have the medical treatment she deserves. As I've been listening to this conversation, what has struck me is that we have differences in how we perceive safety. Last week we heard a bill that talked about safety on buses and how some people would feel safer if they had their guns and some people wouldn't. I feel safer when my daughters have access to reproductive health care that they deserve than when they don't. I absolutely respect your right. If you choose not to have an abortion, that is absolutely fine. I don't begrudge you, but here's the deal. Government doesn't need to be involved in that decision. Those are very private, personal healthcare decisions that should be made between the patient, the doctor, faith leader, if she chooses. What we're doing now is circumventing everything that the voters told us that they wanted in November. I've had 3 town halls this session, 3. Every single one of them are asking me, why are we doing this? Why are we trying to go back on what we decided at the ballot box? I don't have an answer for them. I don't understand it. And they're angry. And they have every right to be angry. When we think about our state and how we move it forward, ignoring the will of the voter is not the way. Silencing the voices is not the way. Mr. Speaker, I want to give voice to one of the individuals who did not have the opportunity to speak. And it touches just a little bit on what I'm saying. I want my daughters to have the best health care available to them. I'm a family physician, and I strongly oppose HJR 73 for multiple reasons. First, over 1.5 million Missourians, an unquestionable majority, voted yes on Amendment 3. The verbiage on the ballot was crystal clear. Amendment 3 would alter our Constitution to remove Missouri's ban on abortion and establish a right to make decisions about reproductive health care, including abortion, with any governmental interference of that right presumed invalid. We, the people of Missouri, voted a resounding yes. It is your mandate as elected representatives to uphold the will of the people of Missouri. By supporting HJR 73, you would therefore be subverting the entire purpose of your position in government. Second, as a physician trained in obstetrics, I strongly support the right to have autonomy over one's body. I have personally seen in my patients the devastating toll an unwanted pregnancy can take, both physically and psychologically. Maternal morbidity and mortality rates, even today, in the most advanced of nations, are not insignificant. There are innumerable risks inherent to carrying a pregnancy, even a desired one. No one should ever be made to accept those risks against their will. Like the founders of this country, I firmly believe in the importance of individual freedom and self-determination. The right to choose what happens to one's own person is the most basic freedom of all. Because of this, I, along with the majority of Missourians, voted to support enshrining this right in our Constitution. Therefore, in the interest of upholding the value of personal freedom, as well as respecting the will of your constituents, I call upon you to oppose HJR 73. Mr. Speaker, this is just one voice of many that has tried to be heard on this issue. And I understand, I know the nuances of what's going to happen. It's not lost on me. But my voters, my constituents, they passed this. They passed Amendment 3. More people voted for Amendment 3 than they voted for me, right? It's not a Republican or a Democrat issue. It's a people issue. I implore the body not to take us backwards. We got to a place where I felt safe. My daughters can feel safe. I might get them to come back to Missouri, and that's where I want us to be. Moving it forward instead of trying to control our bodies once again. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Further discussion, gentleman from Boone.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, to speak on the bill.
Proceed.
Mr. Speaker, it is not lost on me that I stand here as a man talking about a bill sponsored by two men, or resolution sponsored by two men to control women's bodies. Nevertheless, here we are in the midst of some sort of UNESCO play where I have the opportunity to speak the words of another man who was denied the other night to speak. I'm here to speak in strong opposition to HJR 54. This bill is not just a theoretical policy change, it is real. It has real immediate consequences for families like mine. My wife lives with polycystic ovarian syndrome, PCOS, a condition that significantly increases her risk of serious pregnancy complications such as miscarriage, gestational diabetes, hypertension, preeclampsia, preterm birth, and the need for cesarean sections. These are not rare or hypothetical scenarios. These are known medical risks that our family would be forced to navigate if we choose to pursue parenthood. HJR 54's vague and limited definition of medical emergency provides neither clarity nor protection for families like ours. It handcuffs medical professionals and replaces their expertise replaces their expertise with language written by individuals who are not medically trained. The idea that lawmakers without medical licenses or clinical experience can foresee and legislate every possible complication that may arise during a pregnancy is not only misguided, it's dangerous. This bill doesn't offer peace of mind to those of us who are trying to responsibly consider the risks of growing our family. Instead, it leaves us questioning whether we can safely start a family at all, at least here in Missouri. That's the personal cost of this bill. Moreover, it's essential to remember that the people of Missouri already spoke clearly on this issue. With the passage of Constitutional Amendment 3 last November, voters across this state chose to protect reproductive rights and legalize abortion up to the point of fetal viability. HJR 54 attempts to undo that decision, disregarding the democratic will of Missourians. That's not only wrong, it's fundamentally un-American. HJR 54 is a direct threat to reproductive freedom, to medical autonomy, and to the future of families like mine. I urge our lawmakers to respect the voices of their constituents and uphold the rights enshrined in our state's Constitution. Thank you. Now, I'm pretty sure that's not going to change a lot of people's minds, or anybody's mind, frankly. But when we talk about Amendment 3, if you believe Amendment 3, if your lawyer tells you that Amendment 3 says you're not allowed to sue a healthcare professional for damages, I suggest you check on whether or not they're a member of the bar. Because it absolutely does make sure that you have to be within your scope of practice, and all medical professionals have a scope of practice. I'm also wondering here, earlier on we heard a discussion and inquiry about the word sex, and for the life of me, it was confusing to me that it was impossible to understand that it can be both a verb and a noun. But alas, that's where we are. But I not only speak about my constituents in District 50, I also speak for a different constituent, which is the largest constituency in the state. One out of every 35 voters is a registered nurse, and I'd like to uplift the words of another registered nurse named Chelsea. As a registered nurse, I understand the importance of bodily autonomy. I'm in support of Amendment 3 and access to abortion rights. A woman is able to make her own decisions about her body and whether or not to carry a fetus to term. The decision to terminate a pregnancy should be a confidential choice of the pregnant person and anyone else they wish to include in their own decision. The role of the healthcare provider is to answer questions and allow the person to make the decision themselves. For so many reasons, I support abortion and say it while beating my chest. A woman has a right to be pregnant, and she has a right to not be pregnant. If your concern is murder or death of the fetus, I implore you to explore the idea of what we legally murder people all the time with little gun regulations, executions, withdrawing life support, and so on. When the health outcomes of an abortion are highly successful, abortion access improves the lives of women and children. There will still be shameful situations, but that is to be human. And to be human is to have bodily autonomy. Amendment 3 passed, and we want abortion services available for all Missourians. So we already had a popular majority speak in this state, and the House has a legislative majority that speaks for the popular minority. Mr. Speaker, I am troubled as a healthcare provider, having people with no healthcare training coming into my exam room. My exam room is a sacred space between a woman, her provider, and her God. I would defend every other individual an opportunity to make sure that physicians don't come into your pews and tell you how to teach the Bible or whatever holy book there is. But please don't come into my exam room and tell me how to practice medicine under his eye. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
For discussion, gentleman from